Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 61. Gigantification. To obtain this skill, Wu Yun used his precious tutorial time. Furthermore, he fought against Surtur while gambling his life and facing the danger of death. There was only one reason. There was no other reason. That is how great the value of the skill gigantification is. And among the effects of gigantification, there is this. All of the giant's strength is concentrated in the right arm. The strength stat is temporarily replaced with the stamina stat. This also exists. Bam! Wu Yun's arm stretched forward. Looking at that sight, Peng Bekrim's pupils shook. Wah! Peng Bekrim's fist was sucked into Wu Yun's hand. Boom! Thud! Thud! Wu Yun fixed his two legs to the ground and grabbed Peng Bekrim's fist with the strength of his hand. There was a sound of a wrist breaking. However, it ended at that level. In an instant, his head turned white. He blocked it. At this distance, his judgment was delayed because he was flustered. Wu Yun grabbed the sword with his right hand. However, that hand was now holding his own hand. In that case, Wu Yun's sword is now. Sizzle. The energy of the black soulstone flowing from Wu Yun's hand to his other hand. Peng Bekrim's gaze reflexively followed that energy. And the next moment, screech, Wu Yun's sword, which was holding Peng Bekrim's fist, cut his chest. Whoosh! Blood sprang from his chest. The wound was not that deep. However, enough blood flowed out to stain his palm. Wu Yun no longer had the strength to hold Peng Bekrim's fist and released his hand. Peng Bekrim staggered back a few steps. Blood was coming out of his palm. Compared to being cut in the chest, not much blood came out. No, the problem is that he was cut in the first place. A level 10 player making him bleed. No, before that, the problem is that I let him hit my chest. It was absurd. If Wu Yun's sword had enough power just now. If he had a little more time, and if he could raise his level and stats a little more. If that was the case. Did I lose? He couldn't speak due to the absurdity. Peng Bekrim lowered his two fists. Peng Bekrim lowered both of his fists. And even if they could tell, how many people could master the Qian Maoyang? Yu Wen's right arm, which had taken Peng Bekrim's fist head-on, was already broken and hanging uselessly by his side. If he continued to fight like this, there was no doubt that he would win without having to exchange any more blows. However, this is already my defeat. The problem started with that judgment. This fight, from the very beginning, should not have been a fight. Thud! Peng Bekrim's two arms fell. He admitted defeat and lowered his arms. That meant one thing. Fist King, Peng Bekrim, admits defeat. You have perfectly passed the second test of the Qianma Divine Church. You have acquired the Qianmaoyang demonic spirit. It meant that a miracle had occurred. The second test of the Qianma Divine Church was over. Yu Wen headed to the infirmary to receive treatment. More than half of the Qianma Divine Church members who had come to watch the test remained in their seats. Their legs felt like lead. Is this real? The Fist King lost. He would have won if he had gone all the way, but he declared defeat on his own. Was he just letting him win? Do you think the test is that sloppy? If that were possible, it would be strange if no one had passed until now. And didn't you see how he fought just now? He was flying around. Isn't he already at the ranker level? I heard that he somehow got the Qian Maoyang. If it's the Qian Maoyang, they talked about Peng Bekrim and Yu Wen's fight as if they were telling a heroic tale. At the news that Yu Wen had obtained the Qian Maoyang, several lower-level warriors were already heading to the martial arts library. However, none of them would be able to obtain the Qian Maoyang. If it were that easy, it would have been discovered a long time ago. Shin Mugik stroked his beard and looked at the warriors heading to the martial arts library. Qian Maoyang, it was the symbol of Qian Mujin, who was both a Qianma and a high ranker. But there was surely a reason why such a Qian Maoyang was in a lower-level martial arts library. At first glance, the Qian Maoyang is no different from an ordinary internal energy manual. It is just a manual that teaches you how to absorb energy, and it is very difficult to tell whether it is the Cheon Malyang or not just by looking at the martial arts book. Furthermore, mastering it is a whole other matter. How many of those running there have the eyes to tell the difference? And even if they could recognize it, how many of them would be able to master the heavenly demon sword? One person, two at most, no, maybe not even one. Besides, from the perspective of the divine church, they can't just leave the heavenly demon sword lying around like that. Even if it's just an empty shell, the heavenly demon sword is still the heavenly demon sword. It's like a symbol of the heavenly demon church. They might not have known about it before, but now that they've noticed it here in the tower, they can't just leave it alone. I kept thinking about counter-attacking in that situation. Peng Baekrim's voice as he clenched and unclenched his fists, reviewing the recent fight. Shin Mu-guk's gaze turned to Peng Baekrim. He was muttering something and looking at his palm as usual. Quan Cheon-ju, Shin Mu-geuk approached Peng Baekrim, who was still standing at one end of the martial arts training ground. Don't be too ashamed. How could you have known that he had mastered the heavenly demon sword? He meant it as a consolation, but Peng Baekrim's reaction was unexpected. Ashamed, his face was beaming with pride. Seeing that expression, Shin Mu-geuk realized once again how much Peng Baekrim enjoyed fighting. He could imagine how stimulating and enjoyable this fight must have been for him. That kid is going to be a high ranker someday. I agree. And he'll probably surpass the Lord. Shin Mu-geuk paused for a moment before nodding his head. He couldn't deny it, even if it was the heavenly demon, or a high ranker who ruled the tower. No one could say that even a heavenly warrior would be able to fight a ranker like this when they reach the 10th floor. Rather, isn't it an honor? To be able to fight such a guy so excitingly. Shin Mu-geuk soon understood his feelings after hearing Peng Baekrim's answer. I suppose so. Seeing that Peng Baekrim didn't seem particularly discouraged, Shin Mu-geuk quickly lost interest in him. He wasn't interested in his feelings right now. Soon. The empty seat of the heavenly demon. The Lord will find him. There was one more trial remaining. And that trial would probably be conducted by the heavenly demon himself. Yuan received treatment at the infirmary. Yuan received treatment at the medical clinic. Celestial demonic spirit. The treatment was only for his right arm. Some of the broken bones that were blocking Peng Baekrim's last attack had pierced through his flesh and stuck out. It's all done. Head Dr. Jin Il-won checked Yuan's treatment and applied the remaining medicine. Yuan realized how much medicine he had consumed. There isn't even one of those regular potions. There wasn't even a recovery potion that was common enough for errand boys to buy. It was all because Yuan had consumed them to take the heart of the Orochi. It can't be helped. The heavenly demonic cult leads to a remote area even in the 10th floor world. Since errand boys are crazy about points, they didn't come to such a remote place. He would probably have to walk quite a distance to give points to an errand boy and get medicine. Still, there won't be a problem with moving around in a few days. Be careful until the bones are set, and periodically. Thank you. Yuan hurriedly greeted him before he could continue his boring explanation. Jin Il-won looked at Yuan for a moment and waved his hand as if to say that he knew what to do. As Jin Il-won said, it would take 2 days for his arm to get better without proper medicine. Still, it was a fast recovery speed considering that his bone was broken and his flesh was pierced. Yuan, who had his arm in a cast, returned to his room. Yuan laid his head down in his room while waiting for the next test. And at the same time, the fight with Peng Baekrim replayed in Yuan's head. I was careless. The sensation of his left hand cutting Peng Baekrim's chest. Even though he used both hands, Yuan usually used his right hand. There must have been a difference in strength. However, the reason the wound was shallow wasn't just because of the difference in the sense of left and right hands. He needed something more to inflict damage on a ranker's body. It's also unfortunate that my magic stat is less than 3 digits. Magic. 98. Only 2. If his stat had increased by only 2 more, he would have recorded a 3-digit stat. From 3-digit stats, the difference in power that each stat has becomes much clearer than before. If he had reached 100 in magic stat, he would have been able to inflict a deeper wound on Peng Baekrim's chest. The second test is over. The test was longer than he thought. Yuan checked his newly acquired skill, Celestial Demonic Spirit. Heavenly Demon Spirit. Hash rank. A-. Hash proficiency. 0.33%. Hash this is a unique martial art created by Cheon Mu-jin, the leader of the heavenly demon cult. It grants dominance over lower-level martial arts. Hash the spirit soul can be divided to create a clone. The power of the heavenly demon spirit is determined by the amount of mana given to the clone. A rank. It was certainly a good skill. Even top rankers would be envious of an A rank skill. Qianma must have mastered this skill to almost 100% proficiency. And this is just a skill I picked up along the way. Considering the difficulty of the test, it was a disappointing reward. However, Yu-Won did not think it was a shame. The heavenly demon spirit was a skill that Yu-Won had earned after passing the second test. It was completely separate from the rewards he received for completing the test properly. Moreover, the test was still ongoing. The heavenly demon spirit was a great skill, but the test isn't over yet. As expected, Yu-Won Kim. While Yu-Won was resting in his room, a maid came to him. Qianma is calling for you. Yu-Won followed the maid to the deepest part of the main hall. The Qianma that Yu-Won knew was a man who didn't care about formalities and found complexity inconvenient. Perhaps because of this, the place where he lived was not much different from other residences. The main hall of the heavenly demon cult. The maid stopped at the doorstep. Only one person is allowed inside. Of course, that one person meant Yu-Won. Yu-Won left the maid where she was and crossed the threshold. However, there was no sign of life in the hall. He wouldn't have called someone and then left, so there was only one reason why there was no sign of life. He's still as sneaky as ever. With Yu-Won's current skills, it was impossible to read the energy of Qianma, a high ranker. It was only natural, as he was a monster that not even all 4 heavenly lords could handle. Yu-Won walked slowly and looked around the main hall. No, at least it seemed like he was looking around. Opening square bracket single quote question mark single quote. Egg bares its teeth. Yu-Won spoke to the egg in his mind. Is it here? The something that he had been feeling ever since he entered Qianma Mountain. It was right here. Chapter 62. The interior of the Great Temple was about 20 pyong in size, so it wasn't very big. Waiting for Wu-Won there was the figure of the Qianma he had briefly encountered after passing the first test. You've come. Qianma opened his eyes. Wu-Won nodded towards him. Qianma Qianmujin. He was the living history of the Murim world, a high ranker and the overlord of the Qianma Divine Church. Having risen to the ranks of high rankers with both his strength and the Qianma Divine Church, he had stopped all external activities and had been confined to Qianmasan Mountain. The only thing he did was administer the tests, but since there were no passers, there were even rumors that he was dead. I have heard your call. Wu-Won looked up at Qianmujin. He was a huge man, well over 2 meters tall. He had broad shoulders and wore a red robe that covered his body. His chin and sideburns were covered in a short beard, and his eyes were sharp. He was sitting on the upper seat, but he was at eye level with Wu-Won. So Wu-Won didn't bother to sit down and waited for him to speak. Is your arm okay? At Qianmujin's question, Wu-Won shook one of his arms. As you can see, your health recovery speed increases due to the effect of night. Health recovery speed, plus 102%. The sword Wu-Won was carrying, the Black Knight Sword, was a sword that only worked in the dark. The Black Knight Sword, which had the ability to quickly restore health and mana, was quickly healing Wu-Won's body as soon as it became night. That's a good sword. It's tempting. It's not as good as the sword you use, Great Master. I'm greedy for that kind of thing. Qianmujin was detached from everything else, but he was particularly greedy for swords. Because of that personality, there was once a rumor that several weapons that had disappeared from the tower were hidden in the Qianma arsenal. I can't do that. There's an old man who will nag at me if I can't even manage my own weapon. Hephaestus. He has the right to do so. Do you know him? No, but I've had the opportunity to hold a few of the swords he made. As expected, Qianmujin's greed for swords was beyond imagination. Even if Hephaestus' work had a lot of points, it was difficult to obtain, but he had held several of them. Why did you call me? You're impatient. Time is precious. That's a good attitude. Qianmujin stood up from his seat. As he stood up over 2 meters tall, it felt like he was facing a giant. The final test. Let's start right away. It was an unexpected answer. Wu-Won shook his arm and asked. I'm still like this. Didn't I say it was okay? I can move without any problems, but I'm not in a condition to fight yet. Wu-Won wanted to take the test in the best possible condition. This way, even if it was the same test, I'd be able to perform better. That's why, if possible, I wanted to avoid taking the test right away. However, it doesn't matter. Qianmujin abruptly turned his body and started to walk. You won't be using that arm anyway. Thud, thud. Qianmujin headed towards a wall where there was nothing. Wu Wan was puzzled by the words about not using his arm, but he also wondered why Qian Mujin was walking towards a wall. But soon, Qian Mujin's figure disappeared from his spot with a small tremor. Is it a magic formation? Wu Wan quickly used Wan to look at the spot where Qian Mujin had disappeared. As expected, faint traces of a magic formation could be seen behind the spot where Qian Mujin had been sitting. It's different from the one under Qian-san. It's much more precise and complex. Why aren't you coming in? It was Qian Mujin's voice. At his urging, Wu Wan stepped towards the magic formation. Fortunately, the first step was easy to take, as the inner wall of the temple, which he had thought was a wall, was wide open. Ing! A ringing sound rang in his ears. In an instant, his head felt dizzy. Wan resists, soul-sealing magic formation. Wan fails to resist, soul-sealing magic formation. A magic formation so powerful that even Wan couldn't resist it. I can't break through this. If he lost his concentration for even a moment, he would fall into the magic formation. It was then, swish, he felt a large palm grab his shoulder and pull him inside. And at the same time, the ringing and dizziness in his ears disappeared. You have entered the Heavenly Demon's Cave. The final test of the Heavenly Demon's sacred sect begins. His dizzy vision returned. Wu Wan shook his head once and looked around. He could see Qian Mujin standing nearby. The surroundings were pitch black, but a damp and wide passageway stretched out. It was a cave. Qian Mujin strode forward. Wu Wan lit a fire to illuminate the dark and damp cave and held it above his hand like a torch. Wu Wan followed closely behind Qian Mujin, his nerves on edge. Have you mastered Heavenly Demon's order? Qian Mujin asked. Wu Wan answered as he followed him. Yes, it's also been made into a skill. Then it will be more convenient to use. They say the world has really changed. It sounded like something an old grandfather would say, but it made sense coming from Qian Mujin. He was one of the oldest rankers alive, among the few who could be counted on one hand. You fight very well, a compliment out of nowhere. I'll be counting on you in the future. Counting on me? Wu Wan asked, wondering what he meant, but there was no answer. Counting on him, it was a strange thing to say. Thud, thud. The footsteps of the two men echoed loudly in the quiet cave. Rumble, the fire in Yuan's hand flickered. It wasn't even windy. That wasn't all. The unknown egg bares its teeth. The unknown egg is drooling. The egg began to react. At the end of Qian Madong, a faint light could be seen in the distance. A light flickering purple, and a sense of strangeness, similar yet different from mana. It really was here. It was so faint that he could only feel it after coming this far, but it was definitely a power from outside the tower. And the egg had sensed it and reacted to it long before. It's not like a X-ray dragon radar or anything. As the distance drew near, the identity of the light was revealed. It was fire. The great flower is shaken by an unknown force. The flames flickered purple. The fire wasn't that big. It was only the size of an adult male's fist, but it was floating in the air like a will-o'-the-wisp. He couldn't feel any heat. However, Yuan felt an instinctive sense of dread from the flames. It felt like his body would burn up just by approaching it. Yuan took a deep breath and barely managed to shake off the tension that was constricting his chest. Qian Mujin looked at the flames and opened his mouth. That's the holy fire. Holy fire. That's what we call it. A sacred fire. The name sounded simple. Besides, there were more than one or two skills named holy fire that Yuan knew of. It's not that sacred of a power. The name itself was a mistake. But what could he do? A name is not determined by its essence, but by how it is called. If this had been called holy fire, for a long time, the system would have already recognized this power as holy fire. Long ago, when the Shinkyo settled in Qian-san and discovered this fire, there was a prophecy that has been passed down ever since. The Shinkyo exists to protect this fire, and it must find its master. Qian Mujin laughed bitterly. The first Qianma of the Shinkyo, the next Qianma, and my master. They all lived and died that way. So will I. A prophecy. It's not a very convincing story. It's a boring and repetitive story to keep up with the times. And believing and following such things is a common habit of old people like me. Do you really believe in that prophecy? The Qianma Shinkyo is a religion before it is a sect. In a religion, if faith wavers, the foundation wavers. Qian Mujin's faith in the Shinkyo did not waver even an inch at Yuan's words. Although he had lived a much longer life than the other Qianmas of the past, he still had his aspirations for the Shinkyo. However, there are forces in this tower that are much greater than the Shinkyo, and there are those who are stronger than me. That's why I had no choice but to use it to protect the holy fire. So you put the holy fire up as a reward and created the test? Yes, thanks to that, the difficulty has become what it is. Don't you tell a 10th floor player to break the law, or tell them to hold their own against a ranker. Yuan felt like he now understood a little bit about how such an absurdly difficult test was created. If they use the guise of a test, they can hide and protect the sacred flame. Yuan looked at the sacred flame floating in the air and flickering. Who has come this far? The heavenly demon. That bastard has seen this before. A purple light flickered in Qian Mujin's eyes as he looked at the sacred flame. But he couldn't overcome it. That was obvious. The power of an outer god wasn't something that a player who had just reached the 10th floor could overcome. It was a fire that even rankers had a hard time overcoming, so it was no wonder that the heavenly demon couldn't overcome it. But it's not an impossible test. If it was, the administrator wouldn't have allowed this test. Qian Muyep looked back at Yuan. This is the last test. Boom. As soon as he said that, the sacred flame, which was only the size of a fist, swelled up. Survive in this flame, and endure it. Whoosh, whoosh. The flames grew larger and larger. He still didn't feel any heat, but it felt like it would soon engulf Yuan's body and melt him to the bone. Until you receive the acknowledgement of the sacred flame. Endure the sacred flame. The test will end if you declare forfeit. The message appeared along with the contents of the test. Yuan looked at the purple flickering flames. The sacred flame grew larger and larger, reaching past the ceiling of the cave. Even if he didn't walk towards it, it felt like it would engulf him in no time. Whoosh, whoosh, the flames grew larger and larger. Qian Mujin looked away from the purple flames and turned his gaze towards Yuan. It really is difficult, he was telling him to walk into those flames. In fact, it was an absurd test. There was a story about the great saint of the 8 extremities enduring it for over 40 days in the Bagua furnace, but that was a test that the great saint of the 8 extremities received when he was about to reach the top of the tower. It was the same for that bastard, Shin Mugak. The heavenly demon, Shin Mugak, had succeeded in reaching right in front of the sacred flame. But he couldn't challenge this test. It was because of fear. It might be better to give up. This is a fire that even rankers get eaten by. Qian Mujin also knew that this test was difficult. No matter how skilled Yuan was to the point of being able to withstand Pungbek Rim's fist, he was just an ordinary human in front of this incomprehensible power. But he did get the heavenly demon sword. That's when he thought of it. Clack. Yuan, who had been standing still and looking at the sacred flame, began to take a step forward. And at the same time, creak, the sacred flame opened its mouth towards Yuan as if to tell him to come in. Chapter 63. It felt like a moth flying into a flame. Eugene walked into the purple flames. As he took a few steps inside, the holy fire instantly engulfed him. Warrioric, it's not hot. No, I have to think that it's not hot. This fire feeds on fear. The holy fire wasn't just a fire that burned hotly. The power to take the form of fire, and devour and burn those who feared it. That was the reason why the holy fire was truly dangerous. I can't be afraid of the fire. Kai Jijijik. It was hot. The deeper he went, the more intense the heat became. With each step forward, the flames intensified. It was only natural for a person to be afraid. Fire resistance, resists, holy fire. Flame retardant clothing, resists, holy fire. Fortunately, he had quite a high resistance to fire. There were many times when he had faced the crisis of death while climbing the tower, so his fear of pain or death wasn't that great. That wasn't the problem. Joruk. The blazing flames gathered to form a shape. Shapes that changed their forms from moment to moment. They were made up of grotesque and monstrous forms that couldn't be described in a single word, and they dazzled Eugene's eyes. Opening square bracket single quote question mark. Egg, opens its eyes. Opening square bracket single quote question mark. Egg, bares its teeth. He could feel the egg squirming. Eugene clenched his waist where his inventory was and opened his mouth. Stay still. It didn't matter what the Orochi's corpse was like, but the holy fire was different. This was a test that Eugene had to overcome. Especially if the opponent was a god outside the tower. Moreover, if you eat it all, there won't be any left for me. The egg had eaten the Orochi's corpse. It definitely had the power to exert physical force. However, if the egg ate the holy fire like last time, Eugene would be in trouble. According to Qian Mujin, this was the process of obtaining the holy fire. He didn't believe in prophecies or anything like that, but the system was reliable enough. Thump. The holy fire gradually grew larger. And Eugene's heart pounded as he walked into it on his own 2 feet. It was a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. The outer gods are beings beyond reason. Those who come from outside the world, including the tower, create a terror greater than death just by facing them. That was the case now. The holy fire fed on fear. It grew by wrapping around Eugene's body and feeding on his fear, becoming a monster. I don't know what you are. A purple flame monster wrapped around his body. Eugene met its eyes. I've seen enough, outer gods, to make me sick. He had already experienced enough mental terror to make him want to vomit. In order to fight the outer gods, one must have a strong mental fortitude. Otherwise, it would be difficult to even stand in front of them, let alone fight them. And so, Wu Wen had survived the war against those outers. Thud, he walked forward. Wu Wen recalled it in his head. The war against the outers. The fight against those guys. The collapsing world and the monsters that devoured it. I'm not afraid of you. He had become weaker as he returned to the past, but Wu Wen's spirit was no different from back then. No, rather, he had become stronger. I came back to defeat you. Flutter. The flames suddenly became quiet in an instant. Even Qian Mu Jin, who had been watching the sacred fire for a long time, had never seen this phenomenon before. Of course, no one had ever tried to get their hands on the sacred fire in the first place. Did he give up? The sacred fire, which had spread enough to fill the Qianma cave, was gradually dying down. Then, far away, the figure of Wu Wan, who had entered the flames, could be seen. He's alive. Wu Wan was standing. What was visible was his back. Qian Mu Jin waited for the sacred fire, which had become gigantic in an instant, to return to its original form. However, fizz. The sacred fire did not return to its original form. Roar. Purple flames swirled around Wu Wan. Qian Mu Jin's eyes widened. No way. It was something he had longed for. However, it had been so natural for so long that he wondered if this moment would really come. Qian Mu Jin looked at Wu Wan. Purple flames blazed from Wu Wan's body. Then, the sacred fire fluttered around Wu Wan like a will-o'-the-wisp. Wu Wan turned his head and looked at the 3 lumps of sacred fire. The sacred fire hovered around Wu Wan. Qian Mu Jin, who couldn't easily believe it, hurriedly approached Wu Wan. What happened? Qian Mu Jin looked into Wu Wan's eyes. Wu Wan's eyes were not looking at Qian Mu Jin. Wu Wan's eyes, which were looking at the sacred fire, seemed a little blurry. After a while, slide, Wu Wan's body slowly collapsed forward. He couldn't see anything with his eyes closed. In the pitch-black vision, Wu Wan felt as if he was floating in zero gravity. Flutter. Purple flames rose over the black background. It was the sacred fire. The sacred fire, which floated up like a will-o'-the-wisp, slowly circled his vision. It was a completely different reaction from before. Didn't you try to fight? The sacred fire was following him. The way it looked like a ferocious monster was only then. It was a test. If you fear the power before you, you won't be qualified to handle it. And Wu Wan was not afraid of the sacred fire. That was it. 100,000 points have been acquired. Strength has increased by 1. Agility has increased by 2. Stamina has increased by 1. Senses have increased by 1. Magic power has increased by 1. Opening square bracket. Closing square bracket. You have passed the test of the Heavenly Demon Cult. Giant Fire's higher level skill acquired. The skill disappears. Obtained. Holy Fire. Obtained the title. Sub-leader of the Heavenly Demon Cult. Granted authority over the 11th floor. You can move to the next floor. Through the resounding message, Wu Yun was certain that the test was over. He really had gotten his hands on this flame. Swish. His eyelids, which had been covering his eyes, slowly opened, revealing the ceiling. Before he knew it, Wu Yun was lying in bed with the covers over him. It was dawn, as sunlight was streaming in through the cracks in the door. First, Wu Yun checked on his physical condition. There's no burn. He felt his body with his hand, but he felt no pain. The holy fire that had felt like a dream came to mind. And the message that said he had passed the test. The next thing to check was the newly acquired rewards. Holy fire. Hash rank. S+. Hash proficiency. 0.00%. Hash a fire from. It exerts greater firepower in proportion to the emotions of the perceived enemy without consuming mana. Hash does not harm the intended target. Hash worsens injuries. Hash does not go out. The skill description wasn't much different from what he had expected. A fire that feeds on emotions. At first glance, it was a somewhat ambiguous description. However, there are few who do not fear fire in the first place. Aside from high rankers like Apollo or Surya, or giant races like Surtur who wield fire, fire is naturally an object of fear. And the holy fire was a fire that fed on this very fear and grew stronger. The rank of the skill alone proved it. Not harming the intended target is a huge advantage in large-scale battles. Worsening injuries goes without saying. At this level, it was one of the best among fire-type skills. In addition, furthermore, this is more than just getting a skill. Above all, the fact that the holy fire was composed of a skill meant a lot to Wu Yun. The holy fire was a power from outside the tower. Wu Yun knew very well the power that the outer possessed through the long war. That power is infinite, that's why there were many rankers who coveted the power of the outer, but none succeeded. But that, in an unexpected place, Wu Yun had done it. This is more than enough. A satisfactory reward. It was worth putting in the time. However, sub-leader of the heavenly demon cult. Wu Yun recalled one of the messages. Sub-leader of the heavenly demon cult. A title meant another name and position to call that person. Heracles, Giant Slayer, or Son Goku's Great Sage, equal to heaven, were also such titles. Normally, even rankers would have a hard time getting more than one, but it came as a reward for the 10th floor. Sub-leader of the heavenly demon cult. Hash category, title. Hash rank, B. Hash grants absolute dominance and command over believers contracted to the heavenly demon cult. Hash this title can be revoked by someone with the title, heavenly demon. A title with a B rank. Titles are generally much harder to obtain than skills, and of course, obtaining a high-ranking title is as difficult as reaching for the stars in the sky. Even a B rank was a fairly high-ranking title, even if it wasn't as good as the titles that Wu Yun knew. Of course, the power of the title itself wasn't that great. However, if you think about its authority, the story is different. Cheonma Shinkyo was a group that had been opposing the guild, Murim. Although they had been weakened by being cut off from the outside world for a long time, their power could never be underestimated. If it was a title that could rule such a Cheonma Shinkyo, its value would be unspeakable. Wu Yun got up from his seat and went outside. The attendant who had been waiting guided Wu Yun to the leader's room. Are you here? Cheon Mu Jin was sitting in the same place as yesterday, looking exactly the same. Wu Yun had packed all his belongings. Don't you need to be there anymore? There's nothing to protect. Habits are not easy to fix. I feel very uncomfortable going anywhere but here. 1. Cheon Mu Jin no longer has the sacred fire to protect. Wu Yun will have that from now on. I received the title. Are you talking about the vice leader? Yes, keep it. You're qualified enough to have the Cheonma Ryong as well as the holy fire. Even if I become a ranker, I will not come to Cheonma Shinkyo. Do as you please. Anyway, it's not to brainwash you. It's a reward you received after passing the test, so enjoy it to your heart's content. It was a big-hearted remark, but the answer that came back was more stinging than he thought. I wondered if Cheon Mu Jin had chosen himself as the next leader of Cheonma Shinkyo, but it seemed not. Then that's fine. Since there is no need to take responsibility, all he has to do is enjoy the position as Cheon Mu Jin said. Thank you very much. Are you leaving right away? I'll stop by when the Murim competition starts. Are you planning to participate in the Murim competition? I'll think about it if I'm below the 25th floor by then. The Murim competition was a competition where players who had obtained residency from the 10th to 25th floors participated and competed. The competition was held once every 3 years, and the Murim competition was the most popular event in the low-level area. I see. The Murim competition is soon. Cheon Mu Jin, who muttered as if recalling the old days for a moment, nodded his head. I won't see you off. You don't seem like the type to want that. You saw it right. Wu Yun got up from his seat. There was nothing to carry anyway. All the necessities, including food, were in the inventory. Wu Yun bowed his head to Cheon Mu Jin and got up from his seat. It was to go up to the next floor. The Murim competition. The sacred fire found its owner, and the long and strong shackles that had been passed down for a long time disappeared. Cheon Mu Jin, who had been devoted to protecting the sacred fire all his life, began to think for the first time, what should I do? And suddenly, he recalled what Cheonma Shinkyo had hoped for before the sacred fire appeared. I guess I should go back to Murim now. Chapter 64. The 11th floor's test was a team competition. Usually, a team consisted of around 5 to 10 people, but this wasn't the case for the 11th floor's test. As few as 100 people, and as many as 200. The participants who challenged the test were gathered together, and teams were formed randomly to compete. Please, this time, player Halaman muttered with his hands together. He didn't believe in God, but in times like this, he would even believe in a religion that didn't exist. Halaman was currently waiting for the test schedule. Tring, a message rang. Soon after, a giant screen appeared before his eyes. The screen was densely covered with words. 208. There were a total of 416 participants in the test. On average, around 400 people participated in the test, so it wasn't too many or too few. Rather than having too many or too few people, it was better to have a moderate amount. The number wasn't bad. Please, but that wasn't what was important. What was truly important were the members participating in the test. I'm on Team A. Loss and Melly will be on the same team as me, of course. The other guys are. Cold sweat began to trickle down Halaman's forehead as he looked through the names that filled the screen. Who the hell are these guys? He had looked through about 100 names, but there wasn't a single person he recognized. There were a few names he had heard of, but they were all guys who were hopeless and had terrible skills. There was even a blacklisted player who had trolled and put his allies in danger during the last test. This is crazy. Halaman's gaze naturally moved to the members of Team B on the other side. The first name was unusual. Roel. He was a player with a rare healing skill, and he had made quite a name for himself in the lower floors. Furthermore, the fact that Roel was there meant that his other teammates were also on Team B. The other guys are obvious. What the hell is this? Namgong-hoon. The next name was just as unusual. Namgong-hoon, a direct descendant of the Namgong family, a pure blood who was known to have few rivals in the lower floors, was on Team B. Namgong-hoon was skilled enough to easily pass the 11th floor's test. As a pure blood of the Murim world, and born with the immense background of the Namgong family, he was different from the other players who had cleared the tutorial and entered the tower. What the hell? He couldn't help but complain. The 11th floor's test was all about luck. The key to passing the test was how many skilled players were included in the randomly selected teammates. Halaman had already failed the test 3 times. Not only was he lacking in skill, but he also didn't have any luck with his team. But this test is the worst. It had never been this bad. Asked his team test, I was aware of many of the player names who had come up to the 11th floor, but it seemed that all the players who said to have considerable ability had gone to the opposing B team. Meanwhile, the players on the A team were all beyond help. We weren't the wildest kind of coincidence. The team assignments seemed to have been random, but oh that degree. Still, I continued to look through the team members, and then I spotted a familiar name. An unforgettable name that I had heard too much of lately. Halaman tilted his head as Hesta read up the 3 letters located at the end of the A team. Kim Yuan. It had been quite some time since he had stayed on the 10th floor. I heard that he was in the middle of challenging the Cheonma Shinkyo's trial, and it was known that he had been struggling lately while challenging a trial that no one had ever passed. Is it someone with the same name? All the players who seemed skilled had gathered on the B team, so it didn't make sense that only Kim Yuan was on the A team. It was a combination that didn't seem to fit. If it's true, then that guy is also quite unlucky. Kim Yuan was definitely a great player. I had never seen him in person, but he had been updating the rankings of each floor ever since the 1st floor, and judging from the fact that he had made it up to the 11th floor, he had probably passed the Cheonma Shinkyo's trial as well. However, even if that were the case, this wasn't an individual test. It was a team test, where each team had over 200 members. Furthermore, the gap between the members of Team A and Team B was so large that it was hard to find a precedent. Probably many people will give up because of that. This test was twisted. No matter how skilled Kim Yuan was, there was no way he could turn this test around on his own. Halaman checked the members and turned around weakly. The test would begin in a week. Seriously, how childish. Yuan let out a sigh after checking the members through the screen. There were quite a few familiar names on Team B. Some of them were talented players who would become rankers in the future. On the other hand, there was no one he knew on Team A. The reason for such a large gap between the teams was easy to guess. The 11th floor was probably Olympus floor. The 11th floor was one of the floors where Olympus influence was the strongest. There was no way Olympus would look kindly on Yuan, who had gotten in the way of their capture of Hephaestus. The test administrator is Hypnos. He's a ranker on Olympus' side. Even though they said that the teams were formed randomly, it was an issue that could be changed to some extent depending on the capabilities of the test administrator. Of course, if that fact were to be known, they could be sanctioned by the administrator, but it wouldn't be a big deal if it only happened once or twice. Besides, even if they were caught, they could just say it was a coincidence and get away with it. Roel, Namgong-hoon, Salamp of Spiros. That guy was a pure blood on Olympus side. There are guys from Asgard too. The members were definitely impressive. Although there was no high-ranking pureblood like Halgan, there were also direct descendants of Namgung Sega's side, and there were many famous players. If the exam were to be held with members of this level, several guilds would be eyeing them. They're determined. I can roughly picture it. Perhaps it was retaliation to drop you one out of the exam. Perhaps they intended to harm you one in the test site, where murder could be tolerated as an extraterritorial law. But, whatever. After confirming the members, Yu-1 turned his body. This is enough. The world on the 11th floor was called Taklan, and it was not a very pleasant world to live in. More than 90% of the land was covered with forests and mountains, so it was not a good environment for humans to live in. Therefore, the world of the 11th floor was mainly inhabited by heteroraces such as elves and dwarves, known as the forest race. 30 points. Why is the accommodation so expensive? It seems like you just came up, but this place is like this. It's flat and close to the test site, and the infrastructure is good. Did you come here without knowing the price of water in this neighborhood? Even so, if you don't like it, go somewhere else. It's probably more expensive than here, not less. Such conversations could be heard often in the accommodations of the village near the test site. Players who visited to take the exam. Players who had only obtained residency and could not find a separate house and were staying in an inn complained about the accommodation costs, which were several times more expensive than other places. In a world where most of the land was made up of forests and mountains, the price of habitable land was bound to be high. Next guest. The innkeeper, Caliph, greeted the next guest with his chin raised. It was a face he had never seen before. Most of the players who had just arrived on the 11th floor had similar reactions to the ones before. They would tremble at the expensive accommodation and meals, and eventually their faces would turn red. Do you have any rooms left? There are rooms left, but the lower floors are full. What should I do? The rooms on the lower floors were mostly small and shabby, but they were cheaper. On the other hand, the rooms on the upper floors were spacious and relatively well maintained, but they were expensive. The last person to take a room on the lower floor was the guy who had just bought a room for 30 points. Then the top floor room. Top floor. Caliph, who had been taking orders with his chin resting on his hand, straightened his body. The top floor room is 100 points. I don't care. You don't care about a 100-point room. It was money that even the pure bloods of the giant guilds would never invest in for a day's accommodation. Caliph smelled money for the first time in a long time. Besides, and is this the biggest inn in this neighborhood? Ah, yes, that's right. Then can I exchange money here? Caliph's eyes sparkled. He nodded his head hurriedly and replied. Of course you can. Where are you exchanging? The most expensive room and even currency exchange. Caliph, who had thought he was a big shot, changed his attitude. Yu-1, seeing Caliph who had suddenly clasped his hands together, replied. Asgard. If it was an Asgard check, it was the most reliable check. The commission was cheap, but it was safe to use anywhere because it was the best. 384 pieces worth 1,000 points each. I want you to deduct the commission and change it all to points. Yu-1 handed over a thick white envelope. 384 Asgard checks. The moment he saw it, Caliph's eyes turned upside down. 376,320 points have been acquired. As soon as he changed the check, a large sum of money came in. Actually, even without this money, Yu-1 was rich. Just the points he had acquired by clearing the floors while taking the test were already a huge amount. Points in possession. 931,420 p. 930,000 points. It was a huge sum of money that even some rankers would find difficult to get their hands on. It was unfortunate that he couldn't fill 1 million points, but this was enough. Hey, errand boy, would you like to call an errand boy? A message appeared when he spoke to the player kit. Yu-1 replied to the player kit. Yes, please wait a moment. The wait was short. It was an errand boy who was incredibly sensitive to the smell of money. Yay, what can I do for you? Along with a bright voice, it wasn't Pierrot who appeared, but a small, winged fairy the size of a finger. It seemed that the administrator of the 11th floor had better taste than the tutorial administrator. Rather than a disgusting Pierrot with a smiling face, a fairy was better to look at. Can I use the shop now? Of course. Please tell me anything. I have everything except what I don't have. He was overly friendly. Certainly, it was different from the tutorial errand in terms of speech, behavior, or everything. It must be because of the points I have. The errand boy's main purpose was points. They took care of the miscellaneous convenience of the players in exchange for the points they had. In other words, if you had points, you could use the errand boy indefinitely. So what do you need? The errand boy asked with sparkling eyes. He knew what he needed, but Yu-won pretended to think for a moment. One way to get things cheaply from an errand boy. It was to give off the vibe that you didn't really need it. Otherwise, the price will skyrocket. Let's take a look first. Yes, I understand. At the gesture of the errand boy, a blurry screen appeared before Yu-won's eyes. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of types of items. Yu-won scanned the screen as if it was nothing, and found one item. Amenitium. It was the only material item that could complete the Black Divine Stone. There should be one for sale. If it was an errand boy, maybe he had it. Chapter 65. The variety of items that the errand boy had was countless. Among them, there were items that even Wu Jin would find useful. It was to the point where he wondered how the errand boy on the 11th floor had such items. However, Wu Jin wasn't foolish enough to make impulse purchases with such things. In the first place, if he could only get Amenitium, and if he could receive Hephaestus's help, he could create an item that was much better than that. There it is. Wu Jin's eyes sparkled. For a moment, his thoughts almost showed on his face. Wu Jin discovered the Amenitium, but he continued to look through the other items. Then, after a long time, he turned back. How much is this? Amenitium, 1.7 kilograms. The errand boy smiled at the item that Wu Jin pointed to. Amenitium, you've chosen a good item. But aren't there other good items as well? A finished item is expensive, so it would be cheaper to buy the materials and make it myself. That's true, but Amenitium is a little different. The errand boy's eyes curved. Wu Jin felt that something was wrong. The guy had a look like he knew something. This is a material that can never be broken. Moreover, its mana conductivity is excellent, and it even amplifies it. Where else in the world can you find a material like this? Every word was something he already knew. Wu Jin also knew how excellent a mineral Amenitium was. A material that amplifies mana by itself is the only Amenitium. Moreover, it has absolute hardness and strength. It's truly a fraudulent material. That's why blacksmiths called Amenitium a dream material. Because of its tremendous hardness and strength, there weren't even 10 blacksmiths in this huge tower who could refine it. If you can get your hands on it, you'll be able to create a great item. Of course, there aren't many blacksmiths who can handle it. As expected, don't you have a close relationship with Hephaestus? The errand boy knew about the relationship between Hephaestus and Wu Jin. Amenitium is definitely a great material. However, because its quantity is extremely small, and the number of blacksmiths who can refine Amenitium is small, not many people were looking for it. Because of that, its value tended to change depending on whose hands it ended up in. What does that matter? As a player who can make any number of items, if you just get your hands on Amenitium, wouldn't its value naturally be higher? That wasn't wrong. If Amenitium ended up in the hands of another player, just finding a blacksmith who could refine it would be a problem. Even if you did find one, you'd have to pay a huge production cost. In that sense, Wu Won had a considerable advantage in having created a debt with Hephaestus. The conversation was getting long, and he didn't like it very much. Wu Won's expression gradually distorted. So, what's the price? Yes, 1.7 kilograms of Amenitium. That will be 1.5 million points. It was an absurd price. It wasn't that much, but even if it was Amenitium, it was still 1.5 million points. I don't have that much money. A loan with an interest rate of 11.5% is possible. No, player Kim Woo-won has considerable credit, so I can give you 10%. He still had the mind of a merchant. Woo-won sighed deeply. A loan, he nodded. Well, I can't help it. You've made a good decision. Then the remaining 568,580 points will be processed as a loan, and the interest rate is. I'll just buy it somewhere else. Woo-won deleted the item window. The errand boy seemed momentarily taken aback by what had happened in an instant. But that was only for a moment, and the errand boy put on a friendly smile again. Hee. Well, then I can give you a little discount. As you may know, this is a rare item that you can't get anywhere else. I don't have a problem going up the tower even without that right now. At Wu Won's words, an expression of embarrassment appeared on the errand boy's face for the first time. Players wanted better items to climb the tower. But that was a story from another world for Wu Won. Wu Won already had enough skill to climb the tower without any problems, and he was not only passing the test, but also breaking all the records on each floor. I have plenty of time anyway. There are errand boys on other floors, and there's an auction house. If anything, I'll just buy a different item. To put it simply, it meant that he wouldn't deal with them if they were going to offer prices like that. Let's just say there was no deal. Ah well, wait a minute. The errand boy was embarrassed. Wu Wen laughed inwardly. The tide has turned. Okay, now, it's time to drive the wedge. I won't buy it. Then I'll give it to you for 900,000 no, 850,000 points. 850,000 points. It was a reasonable price. It was the price that came out after a long negotiation. Is it a little cheaper than the market price? As soon as he thought that, Wu Wen nodded his head. At that point, the errand boy's expression, which had been getting sadder and sadder, brightened a little. But that didn't last long. He carefully opened his mouth again. Excuse me, 900,000 oh, no. Let's make it 850,000. Very few people can refine the mineral adamantium, and it is not consumed much because it is expensive. From the errand boy's point of view, the item that he had but was just like a trinket was adamantium. Furthermore, 850,000 points was a huge price. The errand boy had to catch Wu Wen here, because he didn't know when he would find a customer with such deep pockets again. 850,000 points have been consumed. 1.7 kilograms of adamantium has been acquired. It was a good deal. From Wu Wen's point of view, the faster he could obtain the adamantium, the better. To put it bluntly, he should borrow money to buy it, just like the errand boy said. That's because what Wu Wen wanted was not just to climb the tower smoothly. Now I have to deliver this to my uncle. Wu Wen looked at the black stone equipped on the transparent glove on his right hand. I can't take the black stone out of this test right now. The 11th floor was Olympus domain. That meant that Olympus would have many ways to manipulate the test and it would be easy for them to set traps. The black stone was Wu Wen's greatest power. It could emit mana on its own and change attributes without much effort. I'll have to go down as soon as this test is over. No matter how good Hephaestus is, refining adamantium is not an easy task. That's why not many people looked for adamantium despite its effectiveness. At least a month. At most, it will take more than 3 months to craft the item. Considering that, it is not a good choice to give up the black stone on this floor. There is 1 week left until the test. There was plenty of time. So what? Wu Wen thought for a moment, checked his status window, and got up from his seat. Why don't I go for a walk? Nam Dong-hoon was a so-called genius. Not only was he a natural pure-blood player, but his background as a direct descendant of the Namgong family made him shine even brighter. From the tutorial stage, he had led the way in various tests and passed them. In the Murim, he had no shortage of anything, with his father being a senior executive of the mid-level guild Murim Ulan, a sect that was counted among the best in the Murim. Outstanding talent and ability, innate background, leadership that attracted others, and effort. Nam Dong-hoon, who possessed all of that, had no shortage of qualifications to sit at the head of the pack. Is it easier than you thought? Yes, they say it's the most difficult dungeon on the 11th floor. At this rate, we should be able to go all the way. Then who is there? The gazes of his highly motivated teammates turned to Nam Dong-hoon, who was wiping his sword with a towel. Long hair tied up in a topknot, a huge sword as big as his body. Nam Dong-hoon was silently preparing for the next dungeon raid. Clatter. Nam Dong-hoon rose from his seat. After getting enough rest, he chose one of the many paths. How about this one? If you're going that way. Wasn't he always going to be? If Hoon goes that way, I'll follow. I agree. All 10 teammates agreed. Anyway, in the case of a maze-type dungeon, it depends on luck, unless you have high-level exploration skills. We don't have much time, so let's hurry. We don't have many days left to finish the raid and rest before the test day. Yes, I understand. The test, come to think of it, it really isn't that far away. The 11th floor test was the largest scale battle that players faced as they climbed the tower. It was not often that hundreds of players gathered to take a test. Is there any reason to be so nervous? This test is a piece of cake. That's right, Team A, isn't that a complete pushover? However, the bracket for this test was too good for them to be nervous. The gap between teams was so large that there was already talk of it being the worst bracket ever. Still, there's one guy who's really good. Kim Yu-won. He's a bit of a handful. Right, he's climbed all the way up after passing the Cheonma Shinkyo test. That guy is really unlucky. What kind of team did he end up on? Team A's news about Kim Yu-won had already spread like wildfire. It was the first time Yu-won, who had been climbing the tower at a rapid pace, sweeping the rankings of each floor, had been tackled. Even so, it would be really great if we win by this exam. It would be a record, wouldn't it? That's why the story came around again. Would Kim Yoo-won give up on this exam? Stop talking and stay alert. We never know when and where we might get attacked. Clack, Nam Dong-hoon walked ahead, scolding his relaxed teammates. Let's do our best in this exam too. That's all we can do. Yes, I got it. I'll keep that in mind, team leader. The group answered Nam Dong-hoon and looked at his back as he walked ahead. It was a truly reliable back. The most difficult dungeon known on the 11th floor. A Gray's Labyrinth. The team centered around Nam Dong-hoon was rating the dungeon. Overall, let's raise our levels by 1 or 2 steps. If we can just catch a Gray, it will help the team's finances quite a bit. Nam Dong-hoon gripped the greatsword in his hand tightly. Kim Yoo-won, he had heard the name often. One of the players who made a name for themselves in the lower floors, just like him. No, Kim Yoo-won was a player who was known to be much better than that. He didn't know if he was a pure blood from somewhere. But he wasn't really curious about that. He wondered if he was really as good as the rumors said. I'd like to see how we match up in this exam. As he thought about it, the next room soon appeared. Nam Dong-hoon prepared his skills and put more strength into his feet. Stop for a moment. After stopping his teammates for a moment, Nam Dong-hoon slowed down and walked forward slowly. Everyone, prepare for battle. Nam Dong-hoon, who was preparing for the monster's attack, stopped. Then the group following him asked curiously. What's wrong? What's going on? The group's reaction was not much different from Nam Dong-hoon's. A round, hollow room at the end of a long passageway. As they entered the room, they saw dozens of spider monsters burned to death in purple flames. Chapter 66. What is all this? Fire. It's not that hot though. Are they all dead? The corpses of the blackened spider monsters were much larger in number than the other rooms they had passed through so far. Dozens. There were nearly 100 of them. They were also larger than the spiders in the other rooms, some of them being as large as an adult male. That wasn't all. Look over there, someone shouted, and the party's gaze followed the tip of his finger. It was pointing to the ceiling of the hall. Nam Dong-hoon's eyes widened as he saw it. Wow, it's huge. Is that a spider? A giant spider with dozens of legs and the size of a house. It was hard to see because it was charred black, but its back was covered in hundreds or even thousands of eyes. A Gray. Anyone who wasn't a complete idiot would know. That was the boss of this place. It was the queen of the spiders, a Gray, who had not been defeated in the past few years. Is it dead and stuck to the ceiling? What the hell happened? Thud. While the others were still confused, Nam Dong-hoon kicked off the ground and jumped up. He kicked off the wall a few times and climbed up to the ceiling, then kicked a Gray's corpse. A Gray's corpse, which had been stuck to the ceiling, fell down. Thud. Its huge body made the hall shake for a moment. Nam Dong-hoon stood amidst the fading purple flames and examined a Gray's corpse. It's not just burned. You could tell the opponent's abilities to some extent by looking at the traces on the corpse. Moreover, Nam Dong-hoon, who was born into a prestigious martial arts family, was skilled at recognizing traces of swordsmanship. It's traces of a sword. The length of the sword is about 4 feet. It cut through a Gray, who was weakened by the heat, in one stroke. Nam Dong-hoon's mind filled with the battle as he confirmed the traces of the sword. A Gray, the size of a house. A player who wielded purple flames. A Gray, who was writhing in pain with her whole body on fire, and the player who cut her down in one stroke. A shiver ran down his spine. What would have happened if he had fought the player who had appeared here? He looked around and saw the hall, which had no trace of soot. He had never heard of a skill that could do such a thing. Did a ranker do this? He couldn't think of anything else. It was absurdly strong for something done by a player on the 11th floor. But even so, there was still a question. Why would a ranker come all the way down here? A ranker wouldn't have any reason to raid a dungeon on a lower floor. They would be able to level up more efficiently by raiding dungeons on higher floors. Moreover, if it became known that they had raided a dungeon on a lower floor, they would be criticized by other rankers. I guess we should go back. They had found the boss room much sooner than they had expected. It had already been cleared by someone who had entered through a different path. Nam Dong-hoon had no choice but to give up on the dungeon. A Gray's thread. Classification. Material. Thread spun by the Spider Queen. A Gray. It has excellent mana conductivity and elasticity. It is stronger than steel. Yoo-won checked the loot he had obtained from the dungeon and put the fist-sized ball of thread back into his inventory. I got lucky. It was an unexpected harvest from a dungeon he had gone to test out his skills. I should get at least 1000 points for this much. Or I can keep it and use it later. It's not bad for an unexpected harvest. I was already in a good mood, and now I have a bonus. As soon as he left the dungeon, Yuan spread out his palm and raised his mana. Whoosh! A purple flame appeared on his palm. He didn't feel any heat. Holy Fire was a skill that only worked on the target Yuan wanted. It's better than I expected. There are some things that can't be explained by just the skill window with words. Once a skill is created and the power of Holy Fire is obtained, the way to handle it is imprinted on instinct. However, you don't know how to use it or how to use it until you actually use the skill yourself. Yuan planned to practice his newly acquired skill, Holy Fire, before the test began. Compared to the S+ rank, the power isn't that great. It can't be helped since the proficiency is low, but that's not the important thing. Holy Fire was a fire that grew by consuming the emotions of the opponent. It was the most fearsome part of the many abilities that Outer had. Controlling emotions was difficult no matter how strong one's mental strength was. The same went for fear. Moreover, spiders were afraid of fire. The Holy Fire that Yuan created instantly devoured the emotions of the spiders and grew rapidly. In that situation, Holy Fire showed the best performance among the fire-related skills that Yuan knew. If my magic stat goes up more and my proficiency goes up, my performance will double. I made a lot of money on this hunt. Staying on the 10th floor for a long time and raising the completion rate of Cheonsalsan also helped. Completion rate, 91.67%. Now, the completion of Cheonsalsan was just around the corner. Cheonsalsan was a skill that had not yet been completed. I was looking forward to seeing what effect this skill would have when it was completed. It's faster than I thought. The growth rate is several steps faster than the original plan. Of course, the path ahead was too thorny to be satisfied here. When Yuan returned to his room, he found a group of players gathered together. They were standing in front of his room and hanging around. With worried faces. What are you doing in front of someone else's room? Thud. As Yuan walked down the hallway, their gazes gathered on Yuan. A total of 8 players. All of them were faces he had never seen before. Are you Kim Yuan? As expected, the business was with Yuan. The news that Yuan had already arrived on the 11th floor and was taking the test had already spread. It couldn't be helped since the team list for the next test had been announced. Yuan thought about how to answer their question for a moment and then nodded. I didn't think it was necessary to lie for no reason. But, we are the test takers for Tima with you. My name is Halaman. Yuan nodded as if to tell him to continue. Fortunately, Halaman thought that Yuan was willing to listen to him and continued speaking. As you know, the bracket for this test is not very good. On the other side, there are many skilled players who have made a name for themselves in the lower floors, including Nam Dong-hoon. It was a story I knew. But I didn't care much. However, it was not the case for others except Yuan. Already, about half of the players on Team A have declared their abstention. But the other half didn't. Is it because of me? Halaman flinched for a moment at the question that hit the nail on the head and nodded. Yes, there are many great players on Team B as well, but they can't beat you. The other half believe that you are on the team. No, it's because your points have dropped. Is it because I hit the nail on the head? Halaman and the other players averted their gazes. When taking the test for each floor, players pay the test fee. From as little as 100 points to as much as 1000 points, it wasn't that burdensome amount for Yuan, but for players in the lower floors, it wasn't. Furthermore, if you failed the test and wanted to try again, you had to pay the fee once more. In the lower floors, there were a few players who couldn't afford the enormous sting fee ended up giving up on tower off trail halfway through. Ida sapati talis points, so it's impossible to give up. Booty guess there's someone who believe his sand follows, so should I try it once? What are you talking about? Let's just discuss how we pass this test together. If that's the case, I have things I want to say. Yuan walked past the group of players and headed for the door. If ya cherish your life, just give up. There's no point in going up that far to your death. Yuan already knows what's up there, and Heel Sok knew very well what powers those who ranked up would have. Most oft those who climb the tower covet their anchors a power. In their desire to possess that power, they want to experience it. It's useless. 9 out of 10, no, 99 out of 100 lose their lives in the process. And this time, it's even more so. Only I need to go into the tiger's den. This test was set up for him. The other players on Team A were just sacrifices in the process. There was no need for him to become a moth that would jump into a blazing house. If possible, Yuan wanted them to give up on the test. If you have nothing else to say, go back. I don't like seeing you guys crowding in front of someone else's room. As if to say there was nothing more to say, Yuan opened the door. Halaman, who had been keeping his mouth shut in contempt, opened his trembling lips with a sneer. Were you going to give up too? Half of the team members had already given up on the test. If Yuan also gave up on the test, there wouldn't be a single possibility left. No, but I'm going to challenge it. Huh, you clearly just told us to give up. Yuan glanced back at the players, including Halaman, as he closed the door. That was for you guys. Thud, the door closed. There was a buzzing sound outside as if they weren't going back right away. Even if you listened closely to the thick door, Yuan didn't. How many of them will give up? Knowing that Yuan wasn't going to cooperate, there probably weren't many who would value their lives enough to challenge him. Still, if they challenged him, it meant that they were desperate, so it would help a little. The clash came sooner than I thought. Rather, it's a good thing. Even though he knew it was a trap, he couldn't help but challenge it. Anyway, Olympus would continue to pick on Yuan. From the moment they interfered with his capture of Hephaestus, Olympus and Yuan were no longer compatible. The bigger the trap, the more it will catch the attention of the administrator. Olympus will try to eliminate me on as low a floor as possible. Since they were deeply involved in the test, Olympus was also exposed to danger. Knowing that, Yuan decided to confront them even though he knew it was a trap. Let's try it, Olympus, a giant guild that was one of the best in the tower. This test wasn't just a test to move up to the next floor. For several days, Yuan honed his senses, which had dulled from returning to the past, to their peak. Time passed noticeably quickly while he was doing so. And after a few days, the day of the test dawned. Chapter 67. The day of the test arrived. The location was the Dark Forest, Eliraum. Long ago, it was a place created by the administrator solely for testing purposes. Exam supervisor Hypnos once again skimmed through the names of the players participating in the test. Following Team A was Team B. There were quite a few familiar names. I'll be catching a lot of flack for a while. No matter how he looked at it, the difference in strength between the teams was too great. Just take Namgong-hoon for instance, he was one of the super rookies known as a candidate for the next high ranker. The genius of the Namgong clan. The player that Namgong Jin-woon, the lord of the Namgong clan and a high ranker, evaluated as someone who would surpass him in the future. But the one I'm looking forward to the most is this guy, after all. There were many eyes on this test. Not only because there were many formidable players gathered on Team B, but also because of one player who had joined Team A. Kim Yoo-won. Among the list of Team A, his name stood out like a sore thumb. It was to the point where it felt like only the three characters of Kim Yoo-won's name were shining in gold. A name that made the other players on Team B look shabby. Kim Yoo-won. He was quite well known, not only among the players in the lower floors, but also among the rankers. How did such a promising guy end up getting dragged into this? Tisk. Hypnos slicked back his stiff bangs. Above this tower. The command from the great Olympus was one thing. Eliminate the player Kim Yoo-won. It was possible to touch Kim Yoo-won within the framework of the test. Especially the 11th floor, where Hypnos was the exam supervisor, could be said to be in the palm of Olympus's hand. Hypnos rode a pure white bull and flew through the sky. Below him, he could see a vast forest filled with trees. That was Eliraum, the stage for this test. It seems like the preparations are almost finished. Hypnos let out a long sigh and rested his head on the back of the bull. If he could just finish this test well, he would not only get a few days of vacation, but also a special reward from Olympus. Hypnos's lips curled up at the thought. That was when Tring, Hypnos's player kit rang. It was a message. Who's sending a text before the test? The thought of his pleasant drowsiness being interrupted only lasted for a moment. Hypnos straightened his back without realizing it after seeing the name on the message. Hera, one of the 8 high rankers that symbolized Olympus. The wife of Zeus, the king of Olympus. It was a message from her. Teams A and B gathered. The difference in numbers between the two teams was stark. Hypnos counted the number of team members who had arrived on time. 51 from Team A, 200 from Team B. A difference of almost 4 times in numbers. Furthermore, the qualitative difference in the level of the players was much more stark than the difference in numbers that was visible on the surface. But that didn't mean that there were fewer participants than expected. There are more than I thought. Rather, there were more than expected. Hypnos thought that it wouldn't have been strange for all of Team A to forfeit the test. The gap between the teams was that great. 51 people was several times more than Hypnos had expected. Surely they don't think they can actually participate. And the biggest reason why so many had gathered. Surely they don't realize that this is a trap. It was the existence of Kim Yu-won, the player who had cleared the tutorial after beating Hargan, a high-ranking pureblood from Olympus. The one who refreshed the rankings on each floor and even cleared the Cheonma Divine Cults test. But even so, he wondered if his confidence wasn't a bit excessive. Surely he doesn't think he can handle this difference in strength on his own. One hand can't fight 10. It might have been true in another world, but on the tower, that was a false statement. One hand can fight 10. Overwhelming strength surpasses the power of numbers. But that was only a story for rankers. Furthermore, right now, he had to deal with not one hand, but over 100. On top of that, there were even hands that were much stronger than ordinary hands mixed in. Since it's a test, do they think they'll be fine somehow? Since it's a test, do you think you'll be fine somehow? The king is chosen randomly. A luck-based test. You all know that, right? The test is not a simple fight, as it determines whether one is qualified to proceed to the next floor. Not only is the strength important, but unlike a fight, there are rules in the test. Most likely, no, maybe all of them. The players of Team A participating in the test probably had expectations for this rule. Ahem. Hypnos, who had been observing the test participants for a while, cleared his throat with a cough and opened his mouth. Hello everyone, I am Hypnos, the test supervisor of the 11th floor. Hypnos, gaze swept over Yuan, then B teams Namdong-hoon, Roel, and Spiros in turn. The rankers watching this test were all their sponsors, or rankers from guilds coveting those players. A more trembling test than ever. It seems that there aren't many participants from Team A. Unfortunately, there are no changes. The test will proceed with the current team members. The players of Team A, who had expected it but were still hoping for a change, let out a sigh. If the team were to be recomposed, the probability would have been much higher. I will cut to the chase and announce the test content and start the test. The theme of this test is this. Hypnos raised his hand for all to see and showed a red fluttering flag. Flag plunder. As the theme of the test was announced, the audience stirred for a moment. Flag plunder. It was an unfamiliar test for those who were taking a test with hundreds of people for the first time. However, some quick-witted people were able to deduce the contents of the test as soon as they heard the theme. For Yuan, it was a test that he was already familiar with. This is annoying. It had to be flag plunder. This way, he wouldn't be able to take the test alone. Hypnos, explanation continued. The content is simple. First, the flag uses magic engineering technology to have this function. As Hypnos took out another flag and brought it close to the flag he was holding in his hand, one flag turned into a streak of light and disappeared. And a number 2 appeared on the remaining flag. This number signifies the number of flags. You won't be able to remember this if you're not an idiot. The problem is, where is this flag? Hypnos looked at the huge forest behind him. The flags are scattered throughout the forest. In the middle of the road, under a cliff, on a tree, and on a monster's body. I don't know how much I struggled to plant this. At Hypnos' frank explanation, some of the players burst into laughter. It seemed like he really struggled to go around the vast forest and plant the flags. From now on, you will gather the flags scattered throughout the forest. The team that collects the most flags in the end wins. Simple, right? It sounded really simple to hear. However, this was not such a simple test. But that doesn't make this test flag collection, it's flag plunder, right? It's not like we're playing hide and seek. The corners of Hypnos' mouth went up. You can take the flags that the opposing team has collected. It doesn't matter how, steal it, threaten them, kill them, or whatever, as long as you take it. This is the essence of this test. It doesn't matter if you don't find a single flag. If you can only take the flags from the opposing team, you will eventually win the test. Lastly, there is a king in this test. Yuan's brow furrowed. This was the reason why this test was complicated. Well, don't worry, it's not like you'll be eliminated from the test or anything if the king dies, like in real chess. However, the role of the king is important. The number of flags the king has is doubled. The ones whose eyes sparkled at those words were the players of Team A. Doubled. The players of Team A, who were relatively small in number, had no choice but to make good use of the king. Naturally, their gazes turned to Yuan. Yuan immediately realized what those gazes meant. I want to do that too. If Yuan were to become the king and collect the flags. And if he could only catch the king that the opponent had, it wouldn't be impossible to win the test. However, the king is chosen randomly. A test of luck. You all know that, right? Yu-won felt the urge to punch Hypnose's laughing face. Random. Luck. Even though the probability was 1 in 51, the probability of Yu-won becoming the king would probably be 0. Now, from now on. Wang, Team A and Team B. A blue magic circle appeared below the two teams, which had been divided into different formations. Let's start the test. Flash. Whoosh. As soon as the magic circle flashed, the scenery that had unfolded before their eyes changed in an instant. Yu-won looked around. The place was somewhere inside the forest. We've all moved. All of Team A's players were gathered in one place. If they searched this forest, they would probably find the flags scattered around. The 11th floor test begins. Find the flags scattered throughout the forest. After 24 hours, the team with the most flags wins. Flags can be stolen. Contribution points will be calculated based on the number of flags obtained. If you deliver the flag to the king, you will receive double the contribution points. If the king has their flag stolen, the contribution points they have earned will be lost. Rewards will be determined based on contribution points. Team A, 0. Team B, 0. Hypnose had already explained it in detail. Besides, this was a test that even Yu-won had experienced once before. The flag stealing test was a test where victory or defeat was determined by how you utilize the king and how you captured the opposing king. First of all, it was important to know who the king was. And that wasn't so difficult. Huh, what is it? What's wrong with your body? Yu-won looked back in the direction of the commotion. In the dark forest where the trees were thick, there was something shining alone. It was Halaman. I'm the king. Halaman was taken aback, as if he never expected to be the king. Yu-won sighed. Just that reaction alone was enough to eliminate him. What do I do? Even without that, they were at a disadvantage. On top of that, Halaman, who had been given the important task of being the king, the core of the test, was flustered. I don't know how he managed to get this far. Crunch. Yu-won was the first to start moving away from the group. Even without that, Yu-won and Halaman, who had become the king, were being watched by Team A's players. Halaman asked, looking at Yu-won as he moved away. Where are you going? I'm going to find the flag, so don't die somewhere and just stay put. What about protecting the king? Don't talk about begging for your life in third person like that. There won't be any clashes for now, so don't worry. Having said that, Yu-won looked around at the other players besides Halaman, who had become the king. Don't just stand around. If you want to somehow climb up, you'll have to earn some contribution points here and get rewards. At Yu-won's words, Team A's players nodded their heads. That was true. Since it was the starting point, neither side had any flags right now. There wouldn't be any clashes for now. For now, the priority was to secure the flags scattered throughout the forest. It seems like they understand to some extent. Yu-won looked around at the players who were starting to move one by one and started to walk again. Crunch, crunch. The forest was quiet. However, the 11th floor was like a giant dungeon where monsters lurked throughout the forest. They said there would be flags on the side of the road, on cliffs, and even in trees, but most of them will probably be carried by monsters. It went without saying that obtaining the flag was part of the test. So for now, Yu-won's eyes turned red. Then, the densely packed forest felt like an empty plain. Far away, he could see a monster passing through the trees. An ogre, the monster known as the king of the forest. And the flag hanging on its clothes. As expected, the stronger monsters were more likely to have the flag. Should I try running? Chapter 68. This is a total joke. Unlike Team A, there was no tension in Team B's atmosphere. The only reaction they had was surprise at who the king was, and there was no discussion on how to use it to their advantage. The gap is too big. You know that guy on their team, Vance? I took a test with him once by chance, and he's no joke. Why? He doesn't have many skills, and his level is low. Basically, he has no skills. I wonder how he got this far. Is Team A full of guys like that? Probably. Aside from Kim Yu-won, I haven't heard of any of them. Plus, the difference in numbers is huge. The atmosphere was relaxed. Nam Dong-hoon looked around at his teammates. The teammates who had joined him in the test were the same. It's not good to be too nervous, but a low but heavy voice cut through the middle of Team B. It's even worse to be too relaxed. Nam Dong-hoon's words made the team members' expressions stiffen slightly. It was something he had heard many times before. Every time there was a test, Nam Dong-hoon emphasized the importance of moderate tension. The best state is moderate tension. The second best state is excessive tension. And the worst state is carelessness. Nam Dong-hoon had learned that. Right, that's right. Anyway, this is a test, too. Plus, there's Kim Yoo-won on the other team. The only opponent to be wary of in this test was Kim Yoo-won. The only variable in this test. That was the existence of Kim Yoo-won and the king. Yeah, that's right, let's get nervous. We can do whatever we want after the test is over. Yeah, we can do whatever we want after it's over. All together? Good. Okay, let's hurry up. The players of Team B began to move busily. Nam Dong-hoon frowned as he watched them. They're not listening. 51 versus 200. It was inevitable that they wouldn't be nervous with such an overwhelming difference in numbers. Nam Dong-hoon felt the same way. But that wasn't just a lack of tension, it was a level of carelessness. They were already taking victory in the test for granted and even thinking about what to do afterwards. They were just pretending to listen. Are you nervous? Nam Dong-hoon turned his head at the voice from behind him. A beautiful blonde woman with hair down to her waist. With her dazzling beauty and pure white dress, she was enough to attract everyone's attention. Nam Dong-hoon, who wasn't interested in his surroundings, knew her name. Roel, was it? I'm honored that you remember my name. Roel, the angel, it was her nickname and her name. The nickname Angel came from her beautiful appearance, but it was also a modifier given to her because of her ability. A gentle breeze blew around her. He felt his body lighten on its own. Nam Dong-hoon realized that it was Roel's ability and narrowed his eyes. Heal and buff. It's a rare ability. There weren't many players in the buff category. There was a disadvantage in that it was difficult to fight alone, and it was easy to be exposed to the most danger. In addition, since it was difficult to obtain skills, the number of players in the buff category was extremely small. Roel was one of the most prominent players among such buff players. Thanks to that, she was a player on the 11th floor, but her value was already comparable to that of the players on the top floor. Don't be so anxious. It's true that there's a big gap in power. It doesn't look like it on the outside. And most of what you see is true. What do you mean? At Roel's question, Nam Dong-hoon looked around at the players who were dispersing. Don't you think it's strange? The gap between the teams is too big for it to be randomly assigned. Isn't it a coincidence? In the world I lived in, there's a saying. There's no coincidence in the world of martial arts. Most things that seem like coincidences on the surface usually have a hidden reason for happening that way. Nam Dong-hoon felt a sense of discomfort somewhere in this test. And so did Roel. She was no fool. With this much of a gap between the teams, it was only natural to think that something was strange. But that was all. But we're Team B, right? It doesn't matter what the reason is, does it? Well, Nam Dong-hoon had an ambiguous expression. Did it really not matter? If it was something that benefited them, it might not matter, as Roel had said. However, Nam Dong-hoon felt strangely unfamiliar and awkward about the current situation. It was just a hunch. And this kind of feeling was usually right. Come to think of it, who's the king of our team? Does anyone know? At Roel's question, Nam Dong-hoon's teammates shook their heads. It was the same with the other members of Roel's team. Roel, who had barely recognized Nam Dong-hoon, didn't even need to be mentioned. I guess he's not a very well-known player. I don't see anyone who knows him. Roel skipped over it as if it was nothing. It seemed that it didn't matter who the king was. Of course, on the surface, it seemed that even if the king of Team B was wrong, the outcome of the game would not change. On the other hand, Team A had to protect their king. It's not worth paying attention to. That was probably why no one was interested in who the king was. But, Nam Dong-hoon recalled the king's face, which had been shimmering in gold. What did that guy look like? It was strange. He had an excellent memory, so much so that he would never forget something he had seen once since he was young. He couldn't remember the face of the king of his own team. Halaman did not move alone. No, to be exact, he couldn't move alone. There were a few teammates who were with him, but the group had grown much larger. There was one reason, the golden light emanating from Halaman's body. It was because he was the king of Team A. I found it. Oh, wow, it's in a place like that. Isn't it a bit dangerous? I'll go down and get it. A red flag was visible at the bottom of the cliff. It was the 4th flag they had acquired. A newly joined member of Team A went down the cliff and brought the flag. There aren't as many scattered along the road as I thought. The other 3 were all being carried by monsters. Most of them are probably like that. It would be like a test of luck if they were just in the middle of the road. Right, but we've still gathered quite a few. They gathered flags while escorting the king. No matter how important it was to protect the king, it was useless if they couldn't gather the flags. This makes 5 for the king. Harima received the new flag. The number written on the flag changed from 4 to 5. If you deliver a flag to the king, you get an additional flag. Plus, the person who acquired the flag and the king get additional merit, so this is totally awesome. It's a really good deal. Should we just try to catch the other team's king? Hope began to glimmer in a test that had seemed hopeless. There was one reason for that. Harima checked the number of flags for teams A and B. Team A, 59. Team B, 110. It was almost double the difference. But that didn't mean they had to be discouraged. If we catch the other team's king with this point difference, we can definitely turn it around. Double. No, it was a little less than double. Team A hadn't gathered the flags for themselves yet. If they gathered the flags for the king, the effect would be doubled. The other team probably hadn't gathered all the flags for their king yet, but whether they had or not, the fact that they could overcome it if they caught the king didn't change. And the person who can do that is. His grip tightened on the flag. Also, there's no one else. Kim Yoo-won. Probably, out of the 59 flags they had right now, Yoo-won had found quite a few of them. But this place is really big. It's not easy to find your way around and remember it. Where is Team B's starting point? We decided to gather the flags around midnight, so let's hurry. We have to do our best since we're moving with 10 people. At least 10. Rustle. The sound of grass could be heard from somewhere. It wasn't from their group. Harima and the other players turned their heads toward the sound. Who's there? The surroundings became quiet. There was no sign of life. But that didn't last long. Soon, the quiet surroundings became noisy, and countless signs of life could be felt. Ah, what is it? We've been caught. Who is it? You stepped on a branch. Didn't I tell you to look down below? Rustle, swish. A group emerged from the bushes and came forward. At the same time, an enemy team player has appeared. Protect the flag. A message appeared for the players of Team A. It was the players of Team B. To each team's players, the players on the opposing team appeared as a faint red. It must have been the same principle as the king, who shone with a golden light. I guess it's because Kim Yoo-won is on Team A. Even if Kim Yoo-won is on their team, what can he do by himself without the king? He'll just lie down and eat rice cakes. Besides, if we just capture the king, our contribution points will. Listening to Nam Dong-hoon's words, some of the players on Team B were wary. They were people who felt the weight of the name Kim Yoo-won. However, that didn't mean they had to face Yoo-won. Their goal was not Kim Yoo-won, but the king. Given the nature of the test, if they could just capture the king, winning the test would be as easy as pie, and if they captured the king and got the flag, they could even get contribution points. What's this? 12 no, 13, there's more. Damn it, don't be scared. We have 10 too. Someone tried to shout out, but it was no use. 10, one of the players on Team B smirked. He was a player wearing a black mask over his face and holding a short dagger in his hand. Now it's 9, right? Wah wah. As the player tried to ask what he meant, a thin red line appeared on his neck. A moment later, his head fell to the side. It was an assassination. Crazy. Artrock. I give up. I give up. Unfortunately, this test did not allow for surrender. The players on Team A panicked. They had thought there was a gap in their abilities, but they hadn't known it would be this much. Run away. Halliman, this way. I'll hold them off somehow. Halliman's teammates grabbed his hand and dragged him away. His mind was blank, and he started to move his legs with the thought that he had to survive somehow. Spare me. Og. I surrender you. A bloody battle unfolded. Halliman's leap wasn't very fast. Where do you think you're running? The king's neck is mine. No, mine. Enemies were running at him from all sides. Halliman finally pulled out his sword. Don't come near. Don't come. Where are you looking? Creepy. A voice came from right behind him. Halliman's eyes widened. It was the voice of the assassin player who had killed his teammate first. He felt the cold blade against his neck. Sensing death, Halliman squeezed his eyes shut. I'm going to die. With this, our victory in the test. The voice trailed off. Halliman's neck was intact. Halliman, who had kept his eyes shut, opened them again in wonder. I told you to stay put and not move around. A familiar voice. And now, it was a voice more welcome than anyone else's. You're not listening to me. Bang! A fountain of blood erupted behind Halliman's back. Yoo-won had arrived. Chapter 69, Yoo-won. Harliman looked at Yoo-won with an impressed face. At this moment, in his eyes, it looked like Yoo-won had wings on his back. Harliman, shining in gold, and the B-team players who were running to catch King paused for a moment. Yoo-won, Kim Yuan, damn, this is real, look at that. That Kale guy died in one strike. The player named Kale was quite skilled, even in the B team. He was a rare assassin-type player who fought by hiding his presence and using quick movements. Should we retreat? There are more of us. Isn't this our chance? Opinions were divided among the B team. Don't be ridiculous, who do you think we're up against? Even with the high-rank pure bloods, we'd have a hard time fighting them, and that guy is even more of a monster than them. Let's just back off. Yuan's appearance caused the chaos to stop for a moment. Among the players who were arguing with each other, a red flag was seen. You can go, but leave that behind. Yuan pointed at the flag with the tip of his sword. I'm not letting you guys go. I'm kicking you out. The expressions of the over 10 B team players distorted. Leave the flag behind. It had only been a few hours since the test started. Although it was a short time, they had been diligently searching for flags during that time. Plus, if they handed over the flag here, their chances of losing the test would increase. After all, Yuan and King were together in this place. Here, at that moment, one of the players took out a flag from his arms and placed it on the ground. The flag had the number 2 written on it. I only have 2, but that's still quite a lot for the guys here. I'll leave these here, so let me go. Yuan nodded. Yuan slowly took a step and walked in between the B team players. A path opened up. In an instant, Yuan entered the center of over a dozen players. 2 flags. 2 flags have been acquired. 20 contribution points have been acquired. As soon as he acquired the flags, a message about acquiring contribution points appeared. 2. It wasn't a bad gain. The player who had dropped the flag vacated his spot. Wu Jin did not chase after him. Instead, he turned his head to look for other players. What are you guys going to do? Wu Jin waited for their choice. He had no intention of causing bloodshed. He would not receive any merit points just because he killed the players from the opposing team. There was no need to resort to violence if they simply handed over the flag. However, damn it, what the hell are you talking about? We were just going to back off, but you're really pissing me off. Let's just give it a shot. The player from Team B took a step towards Wu Jin. And at the same time, crack, the sound of bones breaking echoed through the forest. Bam, the body of the player who had just approached Wu Jin, exposing his neck, split in half. Blood did not splatter onto Wu Jin's body. Wu Jin deflected the blood spurting toward him with his sword. One down, thud, the flag fell to the ground. Wu Jin picked up the flag. The surroundings, which had been about to explode just a moment ago, became quiet. The situation had reversed. What are you guys going to do? Quote quote, quote quote. The players from Team B began to exchange glances. What should they do? If they surrendered the flag here, they would be able to return alive. However, if they fought, they could not guarantee their survival, but if they played their cards right, they could potentially capture both Wu Jin and King. Plus, they would also gain fame for capturing Kim Wu Jin. If that happens, we might be able to receive an offer from a large guild. In fact, quite a few players were thinking along those lines. If they were victorious against Kim Wu Jin, they would be able to join a large guild. News had already spread like wildfire that several large guilds were interested in Wu Jin. And if they could defeat Wu Jin, it was obvious that they would catch the attention of the large guilds. In this tower, large guilds were like kingdoms. If one could just enter their gates, it meant becoming a member of a real kingdom. They would be able to wield immense power. However, I give up. Me too, here's the flag. I don't have the flag. Really, believe me, they gave up fighting. It was an obvious decision. Of course, itwasanob decision. That's only they are not taken away from us, as long as they're not being stolen. Naturally, Halaman's gaze turned that way as well. The number of flags that Yuan had collected so far. Halaman's eyes widened after confirming it. 27. It was an excessive number to think that he had collected the flags on his own. Even though he had just recently obtained 8 more, it meant that he had obtained 19 flags before that. These were flags that were difficult to obtain even once. How on earth had he managed to obtain 19 flags? Halaman confirmed the number of flags Team A had. Team A, 64 flags. 64 flags. And out of them, 27 flags were in Yuan's possession. It was almost half. No, with the skills Yuan had just displayed, he would soon surpass half. Is he really planning on taking this test on his own? It was just as he had suspected. From the very beginning, Yuan hadn't considered this test to be a team test. For Team B, this test was A test where 200 people formed a team to capture the monster known as Kim Yu-won. But the number of flags. Surely, when he had checked just a moment ago, Team A had 59 flags. And since Yu-won had just stolen 8, the number of flags should have been 67. Team B, 105 flags. Team B's number of flags had decreased. But it hadn't decreased by 8. That meant, it's starting now. Yu-won seemed to have checked the number of flags as well. The flags are being stolen. The game was now starting in earnest. So you just ran away after the flags? At Nam Dong-hoon's question, the Team B players who had been collecting flags looked at the team members who had returned after losing their flags. Their gazes held the accusation that they had returned without putting up a fight despite having superior numbers. You couldn't see that bastard's skills. Kale and Max were taken out in one shot. I couldn't even see the sword. It was really creepy. I saw it. It was crazy fast. That bastard's messing with us. How did he move? It was like this. Nonsense. That's nonsense. They continued their explanation, seemingly without any shame. Nam Dong-hoon looked at them for a moment with pity in his eyes before shaking his head. The players here must have some skills even on the 11th floor. There weren't many outstanding players, but they were all above average. In addition, among the players who went with him was a player named Kale, who Nam Dong-hoon had heard of several times before. Kim Yu-won must be that strong. The expressions of the B team players became serious. More than 10 players were defeated. There were only 2 casualties, but it wasn't something that could be easily overlooked. The flag was taken away. In the end, this test was a battle to see who could collect the most flags. Even if we split into groups of 10, we could be defeated individually. At Nam Dong-hoon's murmur, the B team players nodded. Defeated individually. If they were to lose their flags like that, they would eventually be at a disadvantage. What should we do? Nam Dong-hoon was lost in thought at his teammate's question. He thought it would be easy. The variable called Kim Yu-won had a greater impact than expected. Didn't you say that Kim Yu-won came into contact with King? In the silence, Roel was the first to speak. She had a thoughtful expression on her face. I think he came back after collecting the flag. Then there is only one way. After thinking, Roel made up her mind. Contact everyone. Salamov, Kaisel, and anyone else who seems skilled. Yes. Are you serious? Roel's teammates were surprised and asked at her words. Roel's words just now. They immediately understood what she meant. Roel nodded. There's still a lot of time left, but we can't just keep running away. Her words caused a stir around her. It was true. The first half of the test was almost over. Even if it was just one person, if they gave up their flag every time they met, they wouldn't be able to win the test. Well yeah, that's right. Even if it's Kim Yu-won, if it's just one person. And we have Nam Dong-hoon on our side. And Roel, we have enough skilled people. Public opinion flowed in Roel's favor. Nam Dong-hoon kept his mouth shut and listened to the words around him. And finally, then is it decided? Team B made a decision. Let's catch 2 birds with 1 stone, King and Kim Yu-won. Chapter 70. 12 hours since the start of the 11th floor's test. Exactly half of the time has passed. During that time, Yu-won searched every part of the forest like a madman. The monsters he encountered from time to time had flags, and when he ran into players from Team B, he took their flags. Yu-won's advance was like an unstoppable tank. No matter how many there were, they could not stop Yu-won. I'll give it to you. Me too. Here, I'll leave it here. Just spare me, please spare me. The players from Team B who encountered Yu-won were shocked and handed over their flags. There was no reason to fight when they were going to hand over the flag anyway. Yu-won collected the flags they handed over. You have acquired 2 flags. You have acquired 20 merit points. You have acquired a flag. You have acquired 10 merit points. He had acquired a total of 7 flags this time. Yu-won put the flags he had taken from the opposing team's players into his arms. That makes 100 in total. Yu-won checked his merit points. Of course, it was exactly 1,000 points. If I give this to the king here, I'll get another 1,000 points. Yu-won still didn't trust Harriman. For Yu-won, Harriman was still like a burden. If he accidentally lost his life or had his flag taken by an opposing team player, the outcome of the test would be irreversible. Handing over the flag would be the last thing he did. When 24 hours were almost up, Yu-won was waiting for that moment. But it's strange. Yu-won recalled the behavior of the players he had just encountered. Did they know my face? His name was well known. There were records in the test, and once he broke those records, it was inevitable that his name would be known. However, that didn't mean his face was known. But they already knew Yuan and said they would give up the flag first. That meant one thing. They've already exchanged information. Yes, information. Yuan nodded. They probably told their teammates that the king and I are together. The teammates probably exchanged kit numbers. So they knew that Yuan SSI was with me. That's why they avoided me. And just now. No, even before that, the actions of the B team players had been continuing. Their actions were all the same. Perhaps, they promised to run away if they met. Give up the flag, yes, but we can't win the test like that. No matter how great the difference in numbers and power between the teams, there was no way they could win by taking the flags they had collected every time they met. Furthermore, even Halliman, who was just following without doing anything, moved at a speed that was tiring for Yuan. They must know that, around the time that question arose. To win for sure, there were now 12 hours left until the end of the test. As about half of the time had passed, the outline of the test was becoming clear. Catch you and me, catch. Halliman, who was about to ask what that meant, was startled. His eyes turned red. Yuan's atmosphere changed. Coming. Rustle. Swoosh. An arrow flew. Yuan reached out and grabbed the arrow. Swish. Hyok. Thud. The surprised Halliman fell on his butt. The arrow was not aimed at Yuan, but at Halliman. Perhaps they were trying to eliminate the king first. Yuan turned his head and looked in the direction the arrow had come from. It's blocked. What if we aim for the king first? That won't work on Kim Yuan. If there is a king, that guy will be at a disadvantage when he fights. He has to fight while protecting the king. That's what you think. What does it matter if Kim Yuan is alive or not if we just catch the king? That's right. After all, even Kim Yuan won't be able to do anything without a king. Several groups. No, it wasn't just a few people. Yuan looked around. Although the distance was quite far, a considerable number of players were surrounding him. Is it Qian Le Ji Mang, net of heaven and earth? Qian Le Ji Mang. It meant a net made by weaving a net from the sky, and it was an encirclement net that had been used in the Murim world for a long time. There were already many B team players scattered around this area. There seemed to be quite a few of them, easily over 50. Furthermore, there were no mediocre players. Even the arrow that had just flown was quite fast and accurate. In addition, there were no mediocre skilled players. The arrows that had just flown in were quite fast and accurate. Halliman stood there blankly, unable to move. What should we do now? What can we do? Swish. Wu Yun drew his sword and swung it. Halliman blinked once, and before he knew it, a circle was drawn on the ground with him at the center. Don't go outside of this. If you do, consider yourself dead. Yes, here. Halliman looked around. Although they were in a forest, this place was quite open. Perhaps that was why the B team player had shot an arrow at this timing. However, he was telling him to stand in the middle of the open area, rather than hiding deeper into the forest. Hey, are you telling me to die right now? Who said die? I told you to stay here. Don't go anywhere. But, it was the same in the beginning. I told you not to wander around, but you moved and almost died. Halliman shut his mouth tightly. That was true. Wu Yun had definitely advised him to stay at the starting point in the beginning. However, Halliman had not understood the meaning of his words properly and had moved with the group to find the flag. And it was Wu Yun who had saved him when he had almost died. If you do that again, I won't be able to help you this time. Halliman looked down at the ground. A circle. The range was not that wide. The diameter was about 4 meters. It was small enough that he could get out of it with just a few steps. I just have to stay inside this, right? Yes. I can really survive. Yes. Really save me. I said yes. Wu Yun cut off Halliman's words, which were repeating the same thing, and began to move. Halliman was surprised. If he was told to stay still, why was Wu Yun moving? Where are you going? Halliman, taken aback, hurriedly tried to run towards Wu Yun like an abandoned child. At that moment, Wu Yun turned his head. Stop. Halliman's feet stopped abruptly. He could see a line drawn in front of his feet. Don't cross it. Thud, thud. Halliman stood there blankly, unable to move. It felt like he had been thrown into a cage of wild beasts. 55 people. It was the number of players who had been mobilized to capture Yuan and King, or rather, to capture Yuan. This is huge, really. Bar, a player from Team B, thought about the players who were joining him on this mission. Nam Gong-hoon, Roel, Salampov, Spiros, Keichel, Orer. Players whose names he had only heard of. Among them, Namdong-hoon and Roel were like stars in the sky for the players in the lower floors. These people formed a party. And he was part of that party. His shoulders went up on their own. Of course, he was also known for being quite strong below the 10th floor. He had made a name for himself and was well known. So he was qualified to join the party. A career as the one who caught Kim Yoo-won will definitely help. If I use it well, I might be able to catch the attention of a bigger guild. It was clear that several guilds were watching this test. Any player who had a basic understanding of the tower's livelihood would know that much. A fight between 55 players and Kim Yoo-won. Perhaps this fight would determine which players would be noticed in the lower floors. He's moving. At that moment, the group that had been using scouting skills to observe Yoo-won and King spoke up. Bar, who had been smiling as he imagined a happy future, began to focus on the situation again. It was his teammates' job to watch Yoo-won's movements, but it was time for him to move with them. Is he running away? No, he's going deeper into the forest. Deeper. It looks like he's going to fight. The group, their eyes turned white, trailed off as they watched Yoo-won's movements. Bar, who was getting impatient, asked irritably. Looks like what? He's leaving King behind and moving on his own. On his own, he had clearly heard that Kim Yoo-won and King were moving together. And it was true. Why suddenly? It seemed absurd, but only for a moment. Bar grinned. Move out of the way for a bit. As he got up from his seat, the two players who were with him split to the left and right. Clang, clang. Bar grabbed the spear that he had laid on the floor. Baru grabbed the spear that was lying on the wooden floor. A long spear over 2 meters long. Furthermore, it was a thick, solid iron weapon. Baru raised his weapon. Then immediately, he took a javelin stance. Arrows are weak after all. Kwa-ak. Strength entered the hand holding the spear, and his arms swelled with muscle. Like a giant bow being pulled back, he leaned his waist back greatly. 1, 2, 3, peeong. The spear flew from his fingertips. An excellent sniper can predict a hit before shooting, and a javelin thrower can judge whether or not it will hit the moment the spear leaves their fingertips. At this moment, Baru was certain. It's a hit. The spear that left his hand would pierce the head of Team A's King precisely. The spear flew without wobbling as he expected. Baru grinned. He was the one who led this test to victory. Baru, the javelin thrower, will be. Baru looked at the spear that was gradually picking up speed. What on earth was going on? The spear no longer flew and was floating in the air. What the hell is going on? Thud. A creepy sound was heard from the side. Baru was startled and looked around. The head of the teammate who had been with him had disappeared halfway. It was a trace of a head being pierced and passed through by a spear. No way. Baru turned his head quickly. The spear that had just been floating in the air had disappeared. Baru, over here. The breathless voice of a teammate in charge of reconnaissance. When he turned his head quickly again, his teammate's body was floating up. You could tell unless you were an idiot. Something is there. What are you? This side was a waste. Swish. A human figure emerged from nowhere. The teammate floating in the air was screaming in pain with his neck held. Crack. His bones were broken by the evil force. The two companions who were with him were attacked. The opponent who broke the teammate's neck turned around and walked towards Baru. Crunch. Tell me. Woo-won glared at Baru with his red eyes. Where is Namdong-hoon? Chapter 71. Salamov opened his eyes. His eyes, which had turned white, could see hundreds of meters around him at a glance. He was the best reconnaissance-type player known in the low-level zone. He's gone. What? Gone? Salamov nodded. He had definitely been there just a moment ago, but he had suddenly disappeared. There was only one possibility in this case. Stealth. Not much was known about Yoo-won. However, the players who had seen his combat style during the few tests he had taken while climbing to the 11th floor said that he was a close-range swordsman. It was true. The players from Team B, who had had even a slight clash with Yoo-won, said that Yoo-won used a sword. There was no information anywhere that he could use stealth. Stealth? He has that skill too. Is there no way to find him? Salamov shook his head. Clairvoyance was a rare skill that was said to be able to see 1,000 miles away depending on the proficiency. This I could see through most stealth. But even then, Yoo-won's figure could not be found. Salamov frowned and answered. It is impossible to confirm unless the field of vision is close. It doesn't seem like normal stealth. Then, I'm not sure, but it's a considerable level. I can't even see an afterimage. The team members were surprised by Salamov's explanation. The clairvoyance skill was quite famous. It was an excellent detection skill that even rankers would covet, and with that one skill, Salamov had made a name for himself in the low-level zone. Rumor had it that he had already signed a contract with a large guild, so there was no doubt about his abilities anymore. If even Salamov was saying this much, was Kim Yu-won an assassin? It was natural to think so. But Salamov shook his head. That's not it. Assassins usually don't carry long swords. They also tend to wear dark clothes, even intentionally. Then what? Perhaps. That was when it happened. Salamov turned his head quickly. His eyes were still white. Clairvoyance was still not turned off. When did you get here? At Salamov's question, the team members were startled and pulled out their weapons. Then, after a while, a faint afterimage occurred where Salamov's eyes were fixed. Clairvoyance. It's a pretty good skill. Yu-won appeared in the space. The other team members, except for Salamov, heaved a sigh of relief. If Salamov hadn't been there, they would have been assassinated without being able to move. What the hell? Isn't he an assassin? Because he didn't get along well with other players, there was very little information about Yu-won. It was difficult to fully grasp his abilities without facing him directly. Salamov was also confused. Just now, if I hadn't seen that hazy flicker in the air, I would have been no different from the others. Stealth skills that can't even be detected by clairvoyance at this distance. How is that even possible? I couldn't believe it. Is she really a player specializing in assassination-type combat? If so, that would be a relief. If not, and she can still use stealth to this extent. Gulp. Salamov swallowed dryly. If that were the case, then capturing Yu-won would be nearly impossible. It's not that the numbers aren't that great. There are too many holes for it to be called a net. Yu-won looked around him sharply. Team B players, who had been scattered around, were gradually closing in. The widely spread net was closing in. Even if it's you, there's nothing you can do once you've revealed yourself like this. Salamov could see it. Dozens of players surrounding him from all sides. Gazes aimed at Yu-won's head and other vital points. Dozens of skills, weapons like spears and arrows. All of this was a stage prepared for Yu-won. It was a wise choice to leave the king. If you had fought while protecting him, you would have been at half strength. Even with Salamov's explanation, Yu-won didn't look at him. Salamov frowned, thinking that he was being ignored. He took a step closer to Yu-won. Listen to what I'm saying right now. Creepy. His spine tingled. Salamov retracted the foot he had just stepped forward. Yu-won's gaze turned to Salamov only then. Good sense. Screech. Salamov looked down at the front of his foot. There was a trace of a cut on the ground below. Yu-won had cut that spot from a distance of at least 10 steps. Gulp. It was forbidden to move rashly. There were only a handful of players who could fight Yu-won head-on. Creak, creak. People emerged from all over the forest. About 20 players. Most of them were players Yu-won didn't know. However, there were two familiar faces. Namgong-hoon, Roel. Namgong-hoon, the genius of the Namgong family who would later become a high ranker, and Roel, who was nicknamed an angel because he had received the blessing of a god. Both of them would become rankers in the future. They were people whose faces Yu-won remembered to some extent. Yu abandoned the king and started moving. Namgong-hoon pulled out a huge heavy sword and lifted it with one hand. Did you give up on the test and choose a fight? The sight of Namgong-hoon lifting the heavy sword with one hand was impressive. The other 20 players besides Namgong-hoon and Roel were also some of the best in Team B. In addition to that, there were many players scattered around, keeping their distance and aiming at Yu-won. It was a situation that perfectly fit the saying, a rat in poison. In some ways, it was no different from falling into a trap on his own. Thud, thud, Namgong-hoon approached Yu-won. It was a closer distance than Salamov. Considering the sword that Namgong-hoon possessed and his skills, it was a range where the sword could reach him right now. Yu-won didn't stop him. If I look at the atmosphere, I'll know for sure. Namgong-hoon, he was the actual leader leading Team B. Now that things have come to this. Namgong-hoon bowed his head to Yu-won. I'm sorry, what are you talking about? I didn't mean it, but I have a good team. But that's not the case for you. A team that was randomly assigned. But the gap between the teams was too much, even for me. Namgong-hoon looked up and raised his head. I don't think it's shameful to be in this situation. This is a test, so you're definitely a great player, but you're not lucky enough for your skills. What are you trying to say? Give up on the test. I don't want to see a match like this. Yu-won's lips curled up. He told me to give up on the test. I wondered what he was trying to say, but it was just this. You talk more than I thought. Yuan raised his sword. It showed that he had no intention of giving up. Namgung-hun sighed. I expected it, but still. It seemed that the situation had to go this way. Then I can't help it. Namgung-hun raised his sword. Whether they had agreed on it beforehand, the other players didn't intervene. A one-on-one situation. Yuan smiled while looking at Namgung-hun like that. His personality isn't bad either. Whether it's in the past or now, his personality remains the same. Namgung-hun had a calm temperament. He was practical and had excellent judgment. That's probably why he was able to climb the tower so quickly and become a ranker. However, Namgung-hun wasn't a coward. He was practical, but he wasn't a coward. That's why he wanted to fight Yuan one-on-one if possible, even in this situation. And Yuan liked people like that. That's why I didn't really want to kill him. Because he had to do great things for the Namgung family in the future. I don't really care if there are a few people. Thank you for saying that. Chuck. Yuan took a step towards Namgung-hun, and at that moment, whiz, Namgung-hun's sword traced a trajectory. Clang, the swords of the two men clashed. A heavy greatsword. The force of the sword slashing down was extraordinary. Yuan's eyes sparkled. Look at this, the Namgung family's swords are heavy. Yuan knew that too. In his previous life, Yuan also took the 10th floor test at the Namgung family. They really are the real deal. A player on the 11th floor has this much strength. I was curious about his stats. Namgung-hun took a breath and swung his sword repeated ly. Just because the sword is heavy doesn't mean it has to be slow. Namgung-hun's sword was like that. His sword moved quickly, and at the same time, all of his swords were filled with power. How is he moving so fast and putting so much power into every swing? The players watching the fight were speechless. He's definitely a genius when it comes to martial arts. Yuan had heard many times that he was a genius. However, when it came to martial arts, he was no match for Namgung-hun. Not bad. Swish, clang, Namgung-hun's sword rose. His eyes widened, and he felt like his palms were going to rip. What kind of power? Tingle. For a moment, he almost dropped his sword. The Namgung Sega's sword is heavy. The Namgung Sega's Emperor sword form has the power to crush everything around it just by holding the sword, and that skill has naturally been passed down to Namgung-hun's sword. But, what the heck? Clang. Once again, Namgung-hun's sword was pushed back. The moment the swords clashed, he felt his feet lift off the ground. It was an absurd gap. I'm being pushed back in strength. He gritted his teeth and glared. A blue aura blossomed on Namgung-hun's sword. At the same time, a massive force like a mountain was put into Namgung-hun's sword. At that moment, the blessing of the Archangel has been bestowed upon your body. Strength is increased, health is increased, body becomes lighter. Mana recovery speed increases. A tremendous force that even Namgung-hun hadn't expected was put into the sword. Clang, Yuan's sword and Namgung-hun's sword clashed. Even though he had struck with all his might, Yuan's sword still didn't budge. However, Namgung-hun was more concerned about the message that had popped up just before. When he turned his head, he saw Roel's fingertips pointing at him. Screech. The two swords crossed, and the distance between the two men widened. Namgung-hun glared at Roel. What are you doing? He had clearly said that he wanted to fight one-on-one. If you get a buff like that, isn't the match already over? The buff from just now was from Roel. She had already cast buffs on all the other players. It seemed that she had judged that the fight between Namgung-hun and Yuan was over. Namgung-hun gritted his teeth. He hadn't even been injured yet. The fight was just beginning. What do you mean it's over? It seems that they think it's already over. What? Whoosh. Namgung-hun turned his head. A hot heat hit his face. It was a pretty hot fire. But what bothered him wasn't the heat itself. That fire is the purple fire floating around Yuan. One scene came to Namgung-hun's mind. The dungeon of a gray. Namgung-hun's eyes widened. Surely not. Chapter 72. Purple flames were uncommon. No, at least Namgung-hun had never seen purple flames or even heard of them. It can't be a coincidence. Namgung-hun recalled the traces left in the dungeon of a gray. The boss of the dungeon, the Spider Queen Agrey. He clearly remembered the wounds left on her body. The slashes were so sharp, elaborate, and powerful that they could have been left by a ranker. But why, just now? It was different from the traces left on the body of the Black Agrey he had shared with Yuan. A completely different type of sword. Furthermore, he could not imagine that a sword of that power could cut down the dungeon boss, the Spider Queen Agrey, in one blow. Then there were two possibilities. It was a simple mistake, or else they let me go. From the fact that there was not much difference in Yuan's response before and after receiving the buff, he could tell to some extent. Namgungun gritted his teeth. At this rate, it would be as good as the end of the match. And if Yuan in front of him was the one who had cleared a Gray's dungeon. Don't back down. Roel was startled by Namgungun's voice in his head and looked back at him. It was a telepathy. Roel frowned and glared at Namgungun as if to ask what he was talking about. He told him to back down. If the person I'm thinking of is the same as Kim Yuan, this fight is meaningless. Namgungun looked at the purple flames floating around Yuan. We're all going to die. Roel hesitated for a moment at Namgungun's confident words. What on earth did Namgungun see in Yuan to say such a thing? Namgungun was not one to speak without basis. Moreover, he was always confident and had the skills to back it up. For Namgungun to be the first to say to back down. Why on earth? Yuan's gaze alternated between Roel and Namgungun. Yuan, who had been standing still for a while, took a step forward with his red eyes glinting. Are you done talking? Namgungun was startled and nodded. Yuan seemed to know that Namgungun had sent a telepathy to Roel. But he waited for it. Can I ask you just one thing? At Namgungun's question, Yuan stopped walking and nodded. If it's just one thing. Did you happen to clear the Dungeon of a Grey? The Dungeon of a Grey. The players around him were surprised at the name and stirred for a moment. A Grey was a difficult dungeon that had not been cleared for a long time. It was surprising that the dungeon had been cleared, but it made sense if it was Yuan who had done it. If so, so it was. And Namgungun was able to indirectly sense Yuan's skills right there on the spot. If you're going to fight, we'll leave. Let's go. Huh, hey, Huna, are you really going? His existing team members were surprised by Namgungun's sudden action and followed him. His team members left in an instant. Roel bit his lip at the sudden situation. You're a coward, unlike what I've heard. Say whatever you want. Namgungun looked back at Yuan and continued. My teammates' lives are more important to me than my pride. There would be another chance for the exam. Although the exam fee was quite expensive, points were not a big problem for Namgungun. He had saved up quite a lot of points so far, and he could always reach out to the Namgong family if he needed to. However, there was no second chance when it came to life. Even if the entire team be attacked and somehow managed to catch Yuan. At least half. No, most of them will die. Namgungun did not want to pass the exam that way. He had never liked the exam to begin with. It was an option to just give up here. Huna, geez, you, really? His teammates were upset. Namgungun hurriedly gestured to them to hurry up and leave. Yuan did not bother to stop Namgungun. If they leave on their own, it's easier for me. If the number of enemies decreased, Wuwon would not be bad either. Namgong-hoon put down the flag he was holding on the floor. The other team members did the same. It seemed that Namgong-hoon's team trusted him quite a bit. Lee Seed. Roel frowned as he watched Namgong-hoon and his teammates move away. Now Team B had about 40 members. It was still a large number, but Namgong-hoon's absence was a big blow. He was the most skilled player on Team B, no matter what anyone said. But still, Roel looked at Wu-won. He was a truly delicious prey. Now that Namgong-hoon was gone, if he could just catch him, the glory of taking down Kim Yu-won would go to him. What do? We still have more people than them. Does the number matter now? Damn it, I should go over there too. But no one gave up. Normally, they would have been scared, but they were encouraged by the overflowing power in their bodies. It seems like there's no one else who will give up. Wu-won clucked his tongue in regret. He had hoped that Namgong-hoon would give up. I'm just saying this in case, but let's not kill too many people. It's ugly for adults to get involved in a fight between kids. Hero Hercules. He had also cared for the lives of the players at the meeting to discuss who would go back to the past with the clockwork. That's true. We're all going to fight against the outer later anyway. We may not know who will go, but there must be some who will eventually become rankers among the guys we meet. That's a loss of power. A promise made during the meeting. It was to climb the tower in a direction that would save the players if possible, without killing them if they could help it. In the end, the war with the outer had to be fought by the beings inside the tower, the inner. Players and rankers should not be killed if possible. No, any incident that could lead to a loss of power for the inner had to be prevented. That was what Wu-won had to do. But still, Wu-won kept that promise as much as possible. He tried to pass the test by saving them if possible, unless they were a malicious person like Kim Myung-hoon, and if they were not judged to be a villain. But if you show your teeth like this, don't kill them and save them. Surely Hercules would have done so. He was capable enough to do so, and he lived to do so. Because he was a hero. But Wu Wan was different. I can't promise you that. Wu Wan liked Hercules, the hero. However, Wu Wan himself could not become such a hero. Waruk, sacred fire. The flames gradually intensified around Wu Wan. The players on Team B prepared their skills one by one. I'll try my best. The flames intensified with Wu Wan's will. Or else I can't help it. Juk, the sacred fire wrapped around Wu Wan's body opened its mouth. From now on, it was time to join the children's fight. Jebuk, Nam Dong-hoon headed to Team B's starting point. The other team members were busy watching each other. They had left their seats as Nam Dong-hoon had asked, but they wondered if it was really okay. Are you really going to give up? Nam Dong-hoon stopped for a moment at his teammate's question and turned around. What do you mean? The teammate who had asked the question was startled. He never thought he would stop and turn around. That, it just doesn't seem like you. Doesn't seem like me. No matter how strong the opponent is, it's to give up before even fighting. Nam Dong-hoon sighed. It wasn't wrong. He hadn't lived very long, but it was the first time he had been in a situation like this. I don't like it. What? Passing the test this way. And I don't like Kim Yoo-won failing the test this way either. Nam Dong-hoon looked at the direction he had come from. The distance had increased quite a bit, but he could feel the intense flow of mana as the fight began. We can't win even if we fight. If that was all, I might have fought. If we all fight together, there might be a chance. But Nam Gun-gun paused for a moment and continued. I'm not the one who should move up in this test. Ah, well, his teammates nodded at Nam Gun-gun's explanation. Certainly, the bracket for this test didn't make sense. In terms of balance, Team A and Team B had a serious difference. However, Yoo-won was single-handedly filling that gap. In terms of skill alone, Yoo-won was more than qualified to move up to the next floor. Anyway, you're being old-fashioned. But that's the right thing to say. Well, there's another test. It's unfortunate about the team's luck, but that's what I like about you. Nam Gun-gun's teammates didn't seem too disappointed. After all, if they had the skill, they would surely be able to move up to the next floor, even if it wasn't this test. Nam Gun-gun had a satisfied expression on his face at his teammates' response. Fortunately, he wondered if his teammates would be dissatisfied with his decision. It's a good team, after all. His father, Nam Dong-jin-woon, always said. Climbing the tower requires not only great skill and strength. Just as important are great teammates who will climb the tower together. Nam Gun-gun had been looking for teammates to climb the tower with him since the tutorial. As important as climbing the tower, he spent a lot of time screening his teammates. The team that was created in that way was the current team. They were teammates who not only had the skills but also had the same goals and ambitions. Nam Gun-gun liked his current team. Then let's go back in. The moment Nam Gun-gun turned around to take a step. On the other side, there was a player with a golden body walking towards him. King of Team B, the player whose name, face, and everything he couldn't remember was walking there. Flag acquired, 10 contribution points acquired. 2 flags acquired, 20 contribution points acquired. The messages kept ringing. Yoo-won picked up the flag that had fallen to the floor and snatched the flags from the fallen player's arms. It was a pleasant message. The more flags he had, the higher the probability of passing this test, and the more contribution points he had, the greater the reward that would come to Yoo-won. Hot, save me, save me. Ah, it's the devil. Don't come. It was pandemonium all around. The holy fire that Yoo-won had summoned seemed to them like a devil, unlike its name. Well, it made sense. Outer's power is all like that. Outer's power is the power outside the tower. People instinctively fear the unknown. The holy fire was an unfamiliar force to them, and it transformed into the form they feared the most. In that way, the holy fire grew in size by feeding on their fear. Yoo-won's job was not to burn the fire more, but rather to adjust it so that it would go out. If it gets too big, it'll be hard for me to control it. Yoo-won looked around as he put out the flames again. The test site had become pandemonium. Of the dozens of players, about half were already out of combat. Among them were players who fought well against the holy fire, but they probably wouldn't last long. It can't end like this. This test was a stage created by Olympus to capture Yoo-won. They wouldn't have set such a simple trap as messing up the balance between the teams and disrupting the test. They must have set a more secure and solid trap. Right after Cheon-lei opened up, Yoo-won had been using Won on a single player until now. And finally, he's here. Beyond the forest, Yoo-won saw the player he had been looking for. King, Chapter 73, Divine Protection. Angel's Wings, Giant's Strength. Roel hurriedly used her skills towards the players scattered around her. The number of buffs she had exceeded 10, including ones that made her body lighter, protected her from flames, and strengthened her power. Abilities close to being versatile. The power of one of her abilities alone was enough to more than double the strength of an average player team. But, what's this? Roel stared at Yuan, who was standing still, and broke out in a cold sweat. The fire that Yuan was wielding could not be blocked by her skills. Furthermore, dozens of players were busy running away from the fire as if they were hallucinating. No matter how great the buffs she cast, nothing changed. She couldn't block the fire, and it was difficult to even get close to it, let alone injure Yuan. Roel glared and reached out her hand towards Yuan. She specialized in healing and buffs, but those weren't the only abilities she had. If that was all she had, she wouldn't have been as famous as she was now. Screech. Above Yuan's head, a huge yellow sword appeared. Executioner's Sword, Angel Roel, the only offensive skill she had. It was also one of the skills with the most destructive power among personal attack skills. Die. Roel's hand dropped down. At that gesture, the sword of light floating above Yuan's head fell down. At the same time, slash. Yuan's hand, which had been still until now, pulled out his sword again. Clang. Jing. The executioner's sword suddenly emitted a strong light. The light flashed so brightly that it filled the forest in an instant. The players, including Roel, heard a loud ringing in their ears from the collision. Beep. A ringing sound filled their ears. The next moment, Roel could see her sword breaking apart in the midst of the blinding light. Executioner's Sword. Roel's eyes widened. At this moment, she didn't even think about being dazzled. Executioner's Sword. She was shocked by the fact that it had been broken with just one swing of the sword, not because it was a special skill. At that moment, Nam Donghoon's words flashed through Roel's mind. We're all going to die. At that moment, she made eye contact with Yuan. Creepy. Roel took a step back without realizing it. She couldn't think of anything she could do against someone like that. This is cheating. Looking around, she saw that most of the players had already fled. Roel made a different judgment. There's no point in fighting any longer. Nam Donghoon was right. She didn't know what kind of judgment he had made to back down, but Yuan was not on a level that they could deal with. He was a player, but he already possessed otherworldly powers. Roel bit her lip. Everyone, fall back. Her voice was heard by all the players on Team B who had received the buff. There is no hope this way. If we all die here, we will fail the exam even if we catch the king. At Roel's words, the players on Team B looked at each other and nodded. That's right. The original plan was to catch both Yuan and the king. However, it was impossible in this situation. Leave the flag behind. Roel was surprised at Yuan's words. Did you all hear that? We don't have to listen to know what you're thinking. What if we just leave? I won't let you. Yuan snapped his fingers. He felt like he was ripping off a child, but it was a similar situation. Roel, who was contemplating, eventually handed over the flag. 8 flags have been acquired. 80 achievement points have been acquired. As expected, she had quite a few flags. The number of flags Nam Donghoon had was 7, so it was one more than that. Players who specialize in buffs have higher team contributions than inspectors who work alone. It was a natural distribution. Following Roel, the other players also handed over their flags to Yuan one by one. There were no deaths yet. Are you really not going to kill anyone? As the collection of flags came to an end, Roel, who had been waiting, asked. Yuan nodded. There was no need to do that since he had collected all the flags anyway. Why, you don't seem like the type to hesitate to kill people. I don't like it that much either. Are you really okay? Here, even if we lose the flag, we will collect it again. You are alone, and now that the king is gone, for the rest of the time. You don't want me to kill you, do you? Roel, who met Yuan's gaze, shivered and stepped back. What do you want? A conversation. A conversation? I heard that you're rejecting all the sponsorships from the large guilds. Yuan nodded. In fact, there were many players from large guilds who had contacted Yuan. A few times, rankers had come to him in person. However, the answer was always the same. Rejection. Roel approached Yuan after learning about that fact. Why, what is this? A recruitment offer. In our sky, we can give you the best treatment. I'm sure you won't get any better treatment than that. Roel's eyes sparkled. To think that such an offer would come from someone who had just been fighting over the flag. Was he sponsored by Sky? A player from the lower floors already had a big background. Well, Roel's ability matched them pretty well. I refuse. Why? It hurts my mouth to keep saying the same thing. Just go. Then the kid number. I welcome the number of beauties, but it's difficult if you have other intentions. Yu-won waved his hand, telling her to hurry up and leave. So hurry up and go. Whether it's Sky or Asgard, I don't plan on joining any of them. Why is that? Roel didn't give up. If she had been the type to give up so easily, she probably wouldn't have been able to come this far so quickly. Why do you keep rejecting the offers from the large guilds? You must know that this tower isn't a place where you can go it alone. If there's something you desire. It's possible. Yu-won cut Roel off, sounding annoyed. Even without a large guild. No, that's the only way it can be done. That was the first thing that those who returned as the Clockwork Fairy had to keep in mind. You should avoid joining a guild or receiving sponsorship to make things a bit easier. True, that would arouse suspicion. After all, you won't be able to become the center that unites the tower if you have a guild backing you. The center. It won't be easy, but it must be done, especially since the large guilds are keeping each other in check. Damn them. Those damn people are us. Guilds kept each other in check. This was especially true for the large guilds that fought over the tower's interests. They had been at it for far too long. Mutual suspicion and distrust, and pride. In order to unite them, a new center was needed. So stop nagging me and go back. If you stay here any longer, you might actually die. Excuse me. Roel looked at Yu-won as if asking what he meant. The players who had been around them had already scattered in all directions. Roel nodded, realizing that he was the last one left. I understand. Then I hope we meet again next time. Hopefully as teammates. Whatever. Roel turned away. Yu-won watched her back for a moment before speaking. And sorry, but King won't die. Roel, who had been walking away, turned her head. Yu-won waved with a playful smile. So you better root for me to win. What are you? Just go. He urged her again. She paused for a moment, her mind filled with questions, before starting to walk again. Yu-won stood there and waited for everyone to disappear. A few minutes passed like that. They're all gone. Rustle. A sound came from an empty bush. The source of the sound was behind Yu-won. A bright golden halo appeared there. Since when did you know? For quite a while now. Yu-won turned around and saw King of Team B. A man with no face. The golden light that symbolized King. He had moved alone to capture Yu-won. As I've heard, you're quite the clever one. And skilled as well. King looked around in admiration. With this level of battle, it wouldn't have been strange for a large fire to have started in the forest. However, the forest wasn't burning, there wasn't even a trace of scorching. There were plenty of skills that were simply powerful. However, he had never heard of a skill that could burn only the desired target. A fire with will, they will desire it if they see it. The king muttered and nodded. He seemed quite relaxed. He must have known how the fight between Team B and Yu-won went, judging by what he was saying. What is an examiner doing here with something strange on his face? The king's eyes widened at Yu-won's question. His eyes, nose, and mouth were all so unclear that it was hard to remember, but they were clear to Yu-won's eyes. Examiner Hypnos. The king before his eyes was not a player, but a ranker. Can I see you? Very well. Yu-won's eyes, which had been changing since earlier. Fire eyes. They were eyes that could see through all things, see through falsehoods, and see the truth. No matter how high-ranking the opponent in front of him was, they could not escape the insight of the fire eyes with just a hallucinatory disguise. That can't be. Sometimes such things happen. Ha, the real thing is the real thing. It was a short conversation, but Hypnos was genuinely impressed. He didn't take off his disguise. If word got out that an Olympus examiner had interfered with the exam, it would cause a huge commotion. Honestly, I'm surprised. I never thought you'd fight all the other players instead of going after the king. Hypnos had taken on the role of king. There was one reason. He thought Yu-won would go after the king as soon as the exam started. He wanted a situation like the one he was in now. To be able to face Yu-won one-on-one. But Yu-won took the initiative to find the king and instead chose to fight the elite of Team B alone. I can see why they're so concerned about you up there. A faint haze emanated from Hypnos. The faint flow of mana soon spread in all directions. Yu-won held onto his blurring vision and hazy mind. Hypnos. The Hypnos he knew was a ranker famous for his hallucinatory skills. Even the examiner has moved. Warrioric. Yu-won drew up his mana and ignited the holy fire. Unlike when he was fighting the players, the holy fire burned fiercely. His opponent was a ranker. And one who could even be an examiner. He couldn't win by fighting sloppily like before. What a mess. A ranker interfering in an officially registered exam. If the administrator found out, it would be a big deal, but Olympus seemed to have invested heavily. Sick. The corners of Yuan's mouth turned up. Olympus ranker. The intervention of the examiner. He had expected them to set some kind of trap, but I welcome it. It was bigger than he thought. A big fish had taken the bait. Chapter 74. Harriman felt like he was experiencing a horror. He didn't know when or where the 5 players from Team B would target him. Fortunately, it was quite quiet now, perhaps because they were currently focused on Yuan. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Harriman forgot to even blink. He didn't know when a bow or a spear like before would come flying at him. Harriman couldn't close his eyes in order to avoid it. Gulp, thud, his leg moved a little. He wanted to run away from this place right now. However, every time he thought that, Yuan's voice seemed to echo in his head. Don't leave. His gaze lowered. Harriman saw a circular line drawn on the floor in his field of vision. His foot was over the line. He hesitated. Should he run away from here? Or should he stay here and wait, as Yuan had said? Please come back. In the end, Harriman had no choice but to stay put and cry. How much time passed like that? Swish. Finally, a skill flew towards Harriman. Boom. Ack. Flames exploded above his head. Harriman was able to avoid the flames thanks to hurriedly lowering his body. Debris splattered from the fireball that exploded in the air. Thud, thud, sizzle. Flames debris landed on Harriman's back. He almost screamed from the heat, but he didn't have time for that. What the heck? He dodged it. He's got some good reflexes. But why is this guy just standing here? I don't know. Maybe he wants us to kill him. Rustle. 5 players emerged from the bushes. Team B players. They surrounded Harriman in an instant, not giving him a chance to escape. Let's hurry up and finish this. It doesn't seem like things are going well over there. Are you saying we really can't catch just one guy? Kim Yu-won must be really amazing. From what the 5 players were saying, Harriman could roughly guess how the situation on the other side was going. Really, by himself. He had thought it was unlikely when he was moving alone so confidently, but it seemed like he really was fighting Team B by himself. Moreover, it seemed like the advantage was on Yuan's side. He's amazing, but, Harriman made a crying face. What am I supposed to do? It was no use no matter how much he cried out inside. He didn't have time to contact the player kit, and Yuan wouldn't receive the contact since he was fighting. Moreover, it was impossible for Yuan to come in time with how far away he was. I have to run away. Creak. Harriman took a step back. At that moment, Harriman's foot stepped over the line behind him. It was the line that Yuan had drawn. Damn it, even at that moment, Yuan's words came to mind. Damn it, he had told him to stay inside this line no matter what. Harriman foolishly kept chewing on those words. There was no way he could escape from the 5 players in front of him anyway. Okay, fine, let's fight, you little shits. Clang. Harriman pulled out his sword curiously. It was a reckless gamble. The players in front of him may not have been as skilled as Namdong-hoon or Roan, but they were among the top players who had made it to the 11th floor. On the other hand, Harriman was a dropout who had failed the 11th floor test several times. Even if it wasn't a 1-on-5 situation, but a 1-on-1 situation, there was no guarantee that he would win. I can do it, crunch. Harriman gritted his teeth. I can do it. He just needed to buy some time. Surely, Wu-won would come to his rescue. Pay the price. Hey, let's finish this quickly and go. Let's divide the contribution points equally. Got it. Got it. We'll distribute the flags properly later. The players, blinded by contribution points, approached Harriman. Before he knew it, they were only a few steps away. Harriman swung his sword with all his might without leaving the circle. Whoosh. The sword passed through the air. A smirk appeared on the lips of the player who had come closest. Pathetic. Just because there was a difference in skill didn't mean that the other players would just stand still. In the first place, this wasn't a fair fight for them. Farewell. Consider yourself unlucky. Whiz. The same sphere of fire as before. This time, it flew right in front of him, leaving him no time to dodge. I'm going to die. That moment, Harriman sensed his own end. Bang. Sparks flew, right before his eyes, and Harriman saw it clearly. Crackle. A huge hand separated Harriman and the players. Harriman turned his head to look behind him. It was distorted like smoke, but it looked like the shape of a person. That something's hand protected Harriman. What is that? A ghost? Is that a skill of his? The players hesitated at the overwhelming mana. They had thought it would be an easy hunt, but an unexpected problem had popped up. Swish, Harriman looked at the circle that Wu Won had drawn on the floor. Next, his gaze moved to the figure standing behind him as if protecting him. Ha, ha ha, Harriman laughed awkwardly. As the tension eased, his legs gave out. Qian Maoyang, there was only one thought in his mind. I'm alive. About 10 days before the start of the test, Hypnos received a message from Olympus. Eliminate Kim Yu-won. The message was short but shocking. Also, Hypnos, who knew better than anyone how far the repercussions of this would go, couldn't help but worry. The role of the test supervisor was to eliminate any accidents or unreasonable things that might occur during the test. It was also a position that managed the test and set the board. However, Olympus's order was no different than manipulating the test itself. I thought I was crazy. Fortunately, the method was not difficult. Since the test on the 11th floor is characterized by the arrangement of the teams. Of course, I would be suspected to some extent, but there would be no major problems with this. Hypnos had the background of Olympus. But, even Lady Hera is interested. Just before the test began, a message arrived from Hera, the high ranker of Olympus. Kill Kim Yu-won by any means necessary. The method does not matter. The contents of the message were not much different, but the weight was different. Unlike the orders that came from the higher-ups, this was a message sent directly by Hera. Hypnos had to follow this order. Moreover, he could not fail. So I made a decision. I decided to move myself. I wondered if it was a bit too much. That's enough. The scenery turned black. Hypnos looked at Yuan, who was standing in his mana. Perhaps ordinary players would have already fallen asleep. Even players with considerable skill would have their eyes half open due to the influence of mana. On the other hand, Yu-won was fine. There are two possibilities. Either his magic power stat is high enough to resist his mana, or his mental strength is that great. The former was hard to even think about. Perhaps his mental strength is that great. Still, he was a player in the lower section. No matter how many penalties there was no way there would be a fight. Ku-woo, the color of mana scattered everywhere turned darker. Soon, Hypnos' skill was revealed. Black Knight. At that moment, Yu-won's body staggered. Hypnos smiled. I'm caught. Black Knight. It was the skill that had made Hypnos what he was now, the skill he had used for the longest time. Black Knight was an illusion skill that forced all living beings in the space to fall into a dream. Perhaps by now, Yu-won would be desperately trying to fight off the overwhelming sleep. Is it hard? Hypnos approached Yu-won. Don't hold on and give up. You'll have a good dream if you just close your eyes for a moment. It was sweet talk. Most of them fall for these words. Yu-won was no different. Swish, the eyelids gradually close. Yu-won's staggering body stopped. Hypnos smiled. Yu-won fell asleep on the spot. That's the end. Everyone has a desire for sleep. And Hypnos had the power to stimulate that desire and force it into a dream. The timing wasn't bad either. Now is the time when Black Knight exerts its greatest power. Crunch. Hypnos walked towards Yu-won. The penalty was gradually starting to take effect because he had spread his mana over a wide area. Since he had spread his mana widely, the penalty was beginning to set in. Hypnos pulled out a short dagger hidden in his bosom. No matter how good you are with a sword, you are still a low-level player. The sharpened blade of the knife was aimed at Yuan's neck. I don't know what happened, but don't blame me too much. It's my fault for offending Olympus. Hypnos's blade emitted a light. Let's end this. That was fun. Swish. Quote exclamation mark quote. Hypnos fell back, but it was already too late. Crack. His chest was cut open. Crackle, crackle. Mana from all around gathered in Hypnos's body. He quickly moved the mana to heal the wound, but a wound was too deep for that. The wound was quite deep. Buzz, buzz. Dark mana was no swirling around Yuan'sword. It was a high-level magic sword, even at first glance. It must not have been an ordinary skill, since it could cut deeply into the body of a ranker like himself. That was foolish. Yuan seemed to regret it. Yuan lightly swung his sword to remove the blood, and unlike before, he looked fine. Far from falling asleep, he didn't even seem tired. Hypnos gritted his teeth. Was it all an act? Yuan didn't answer. Hypnos took that as eyes. Of course, if he had been caught in his skill, he wouldn't have been able to swing his sword like this. Yuan had been narrowing the distance from the beginning, aiming for a single blow. That's a cowardly thing to do. You're in no position to say that. Hypnos had no choice but to shut his mouth at Yuan's words. Strictly speaking, he had nothing to say. No matter how great his abilities were, His opponent was a player who had just stretched the 11th floor. On the other hand, he was a ranker backed by the giant guild, Olympus, and he was the supervisor of the exam, with the duty to ensure that the exam was fair. There was no need to think about who was more cowardly. It doesn't matter. Hypnos, who had been pressing on his wound with one hand, gritted his teeth. You're still just a player. The result won't change. No. You won't look it around. The surroundings were still dark. The Black Knight, the main skill that symbolized the ranker, Hypnos, who used illusion skills. It will change. Crackle, crackle, black mana flowed out of the sword in Yuan's hand. An ominous flow of mana. Black-colored, dark attribute mana. The Black Knight sword, due to the effect of the skill, Black Knight, health recovery speed increases. Health recovery speed, plus 200%. Due to the effect of the skill, Black Knight, mana recovery speed increases. Mana recovery speed, plus 100%. Due to the effect of the skill, Black Knight, mana boost rate increases. Mana boost rate, plus 100%. The knight was nothingness's time alone. Chapter 75. Mana filled his body to the brim. Wu Jin enjoyed this sensation. As I thought, strength entered his hand that was holding the sword. The Black Knight sword wasn't a perfect sword. It had the limitation of only being able to exert its power in the limited situations of night and darkness. It was certainly a big disadvantage. However, just like now, if it was late at night, and he could be under the influence of near-perfect darkness thanks to Hypnos' skill, even more so. It's the best item. He felt anew how great Hephaestus' ability was. Wu Jin caught his breath and sharpened his tension. He had been injured, but his opponent was a ranker. He couldn't let his tension down. Hypnos is a ranker who mainly uses illusion-type skills. Fortunately, Hypnos was an opponent that he somewhat understood. His combat position is close-range mage. A ranker who specializes in illusion-type skills and uses dark attribute mana. Crackle. Wu Jin felt the power of the burning holy fire and the black jewel bursting in his hand, and his eyes flashed. I'm confident against this type. Throb, throb. Wu Jin's arms swelled, gigantification manifested, and the holy fire wrapped around his sword. Crackle, crackle, the mana of Hypnos that had been spread in all directions began to move. Creak, the distance between the two people narrowed. Wu Jin and Hypnos, their combat styles were different, but the distance the two preferred was similar. Swish, Hypnos, blade flew. It was a fairly fast and sharp blade. Wu Jin wasn't fazed by it. Rip, Hypnos, afterimage disappeared, and another Hypnos appeared right beside him. Another illusion-type skill. The heavenly vision saw through all of Hypnos' illusions. Swish, clang, whir, whir, two blades clashed, and mana of the same color spread in all directions. Wu Jin's sword wasn't pushed back by Hypnos. Even though the size of the sword was different, Hypnos couldn't believe the current situation. Boom, boom, bang, the purple holy fire threatened Hypnos every moment and burned. Hypnos cut through the flames and swallowed them into the darkness. Whenever the flames came close, an inexplicable fear crept up. What the hell is this skill? It was the same when he first saw the fire Wu Jin wielded. A fire of a color he had never seen before. Moreover, when he faced it, he instinctively felt rejection for an unknown reason. And as that rejection and fear grew, the flames burned even hotter. No, Hypnos soon realized the true nature of the fire Wu Jin wielded. It's not getting hotter. Hypnos reached out his hand. Boom, the flames that were flying in the air were caught in his hand. Hypnos, who had the ability to make dreams reality, had the ability to grab something that didn't have a physical form. Crackle, crackle, his hand that was holding the fire was hot. However, it wasn't as hot as before. It feels hot. It was a peculiar skill. A skill that stimulated the opponent's fear and changed its power depending on that emotion. It's annoying. Hiss. Hypnos, hand moved. Crackle, crackle. Electricity ran through his body. A sign that the penalty was beginning. And it also meant that the power Hypnos had just used was that great. Roar. The holy fire was pushed away in all directions. It looked as if a giant hole had been made in the center. Wu Jin hesitated for a moment before swinging his sword. Rip. Mana burst from the black jewel and added power to his sword. Hypnos, who no longer had to worry about the holy fire, faced Wu Jin head-on again. Clang, 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 clang. The two swords clashed, and countless sword marks appeared on the ground whenever the tips of the swords cut through the air. It was already their 100th exchange. And as time passed, Hypnos' surprise only grew. A peerless talent. That's a unique talent. Instead, he couldn't help but have his hand cut and torn. No matter how outstanding he is, he's just a player on the 11th floor. That stereotype that had been so ingrained was shattered. Players in the lower floors could never beat rankers. It was an unchanging law that had been in place for a long time. Occasionally, there were high-ranking purebloods with dazzling talents who surpassed rankers before becoming rankers themselves, but that was only after they had climbed the tower to a certain extent. If this guy were to become a ranker after some time, it was unimaginable what kind of monster he would become. That can't happen. He now understood why Hera was concerned about a single player. I have to kill him here. Hypnose, momentum changed. Lunar dream, Pazuzuzuzu. The penalty inflicted on Hypno's body intensified. At the same time, a giant circle appeared in the black space that surrounded them. It was as if a single moon hung round in the empty night sky. Crack, cheeses. The moon cracked. It was the beginning. Quagwong. The moon exploded. Shards of the moon poured down. There was nowhere to escape. Aren't you afraid of the administrator? Hypnose paused for a moment at Yuan's words. The mana that had been moving fiercely also hesitated. But only for a moment. Hypnose bit his lip. I only live for Olympus. What a waste. Say whatever you want. Kururur. The atmosphere, the ground, and the sky shook. A little boy who knows nothing wouldn't understand the cause. The cause. Yuan looked at the shards of the moon that had fallen nearby. Keep this in mind, when he first revealed the clockwork. At that time, Chrono's words came to mind. Whoever takes this. Everyone had gathered in that place. Chronos had said while showing them the clockwork. That person will have to shoulder the weight of this tower. It was a tower made up of dozens, hundreds of worlds. It was a world where tens, hundreds of billions, trillions of beings lived and coexisted. And that world was soon to be destroyed. Yuan knew. I know the end of this world. That's why the person who takes it has to be able to withstand that weight. Yuan only realized after he had returned. Just how heavy it was. Hypnose didn't know how heavy a burden Yuan carried on his shoulders. I may not know, but I do know one thing. The cause. It wasn't a word that could be uttered so easily. As it was an unfamiliar word, one had to have the responsibility and qualifications to speak it. Yuan didn't know what it was either. But there was one thing he did know. The original meaning of the cause is. Yuan laughed at Hypnose. It's what you say when you sacrifice yourself, not others. Like himself, who had returned to fight that hellish battle again. Isn't that cooler? At least in terms of qualifications, he was more qualified than Hypnose. Kururur. Bang, quang, crash. The collapsed moon shards covered the ground. Yuan's body was crushed under the rubble, and the ground, unable to withstand the weight, collapsed. Hypnose, the caster who had used the skill, was unharmed. Strangely, the collapsed moon shards didn't fall around Hypnose. The surroundings were filled with rubble. Yuan must have been buried in it. Cool, Hypnose, face distorted. A guy who doesn't even know the will of Olympus such words. Hypnose clenched his fists. He knew too, that what he was doing now was considered an unforgivable crime in the tower. But he couldn't help it. Everything is for Olympus. He repeated the same words to himself while closing his eyes. For Olympus. Pook. A hot sensation pierced his back and chest. Hypnose looked down. He saw a sharp, black blade stained with bright red blood. Hup. Sentimentality is forbidden during a fight. Yuan's sword was imbued with strength. Hypnose grabbed the blade with his hand. He barely managed to stop his body from being cut in half with his brute strength. Instead, he couldn't help his hand being cut and torn. Whoosh. Mana gushed out of Hypnose's body. The intense penalty mana that gushed out was threatening to Eugene as well. Eventually, Eugene pulled out the sword he had stabbed into Hypnose's back and distanced himself. Swish, swish. The fragments of the moon that were scattered around gradually disappeared. The scenery returned to normal for the first time. Hypnose had an unbelievable expression. How? The strongest skill he had, used with the Dark Knight. Lunar Dream. It was a fraudulent skill that made illusions within the range of Hypnose's mana into reality. Lunar Dream showed the illusions Hypnose wanted to the opponent. Even if it was determined to be an illusion, it wasn't easy to be certain that the pile of rocks falling in front of one's eyes was an illusion. That's the nature of sight. It creates fear even when you know it's false. And Lunar Dream had the power to turn that fear into reality. There were two conditions to break it. The first was to recognize that the sight unfolding before one's eyes was an illusion. The second was to not feel even a little bit of fear even after seeing the fragments of the moon falling down in the illusion. Because the moment one doubted whether it was real or not, the illusion would become reality. Is it because of those eyes? Hypnos looked at Eugene's eyes. Eyes turned red. An unusual flow of mana could be felt centered around those eyes. There were countless skills related to the eyes that he hadn't paid much attention to, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Eugene didn't deny it. They're pretty good eyes. In this fight, Eugene focused more on the heavenly eyes than anything else. He already knew Hypnos's fighting style. The problem was figuring out his illusions. Hypnos's skill mixed illusions and reality, so it was important to figure out what was real. There's nothing better than the heavenly eyes for that. The heavenly eyes weren't a perfect skill. Since it wasn't yet complete as the heavenly eye's divine protection, its effects were only half as effective. However, the heavenly eyes were definitely the best counter skill for illusion-type skills. The reason Eugene was able to be confident in this fight was also thanks to the heavenly eyes. It's not over yet. Thud. Hypnos grabbed his wound with one hand and took a big step toward Eugene. If my illusion skills don't work, then I'll use another method. No. Eugene lowered the bloody sword in his hand. It's over. What? Hypnos had a look of doubt. No matter how bad his physical condition was, he couldn't believe he was relaxing his posture so defenselessly. Furthermore, Eugene was calming down his fighting spirit that he had been raising until just a moment ago. Is he trying to induce carelessness again? Hypnos didn't let his guard down anymore. Eugene's abilities so far had been too great to let his guard down. Clang. Hypnos's eyes flashed as he put strength into the dagger in his hand. I'll definitely cut his throat this time. Crackle. The penalty flowed out of his body. Not carelessly this time. Since he knew that his opponent had figured out the illusion, he intended to acknowledge it and cut his throat more surely. However, creak, creak, the sword didn't move, as if some strong force was holding his sword back. Behind you. And in that situation, Eugene spoke with a smiling face. See who came. In an instant, cold sweat ran down Hypnos's forehead. He could tell who had come behind him even without being told. Hypnos carefully turned his head. Then, what he saw was a large man with fierce-looking red skin. Administrator Nim. It was the administrator of the 11th floor who had appointed Hypnos as the test supervisor. Chapter 76. Clang. The blade shattered and fragments splattered on his face. Hypnos opened his eyes tightly and then opened them. The administrator had already taken another step closer. Explain yourself. He had the illusion that his whole body was being crushed. His mouth was parched and he was sweating coldly. When he glanced slightly to the side, Yu-1 was looking at him with his arms crossed. He was a participant in the exam. It was clear who the administrator was on the side of in this situation. Administrator, that's. He opened his mouth but had nothing else to say. Hypnos, who had been trailing off, turned around and knelt towards the administrator. Thud. I apologize, administrator. Hypnos bowed his head towards the administrator. Perhaps seeing that he had come this far, the administrator would understand the situation. Hypnos had used his strength to the limit of his penalty. The administrator couldn't have not known about the situation if he had used this much strength. This situation had occurred because the fight had been unexpectedly long. I see that you're sorry. I have committed a grave sin. Was it Olympus's orders? Hypnos paused for a moment at the administrator's words. The administrator nodded at his reaction. I thought so. Which bastard ordered you? Ares, Hera, or Zeus? My own. Hypnos realized that he had raised his voice without knowing it and hurriedly lowered it. Doing. On your own. The administrator's lips curled up. It was something that even a fool wouldn't believe. Are you trying to take the fall for them? It's not like that. Even if that's the case, we can't not hold Olympus responsible. Hypnos's expression crumbled at the administrator's words. His face was in shock. Hypnos's loyalty to Olympus was that great. He had been prepared to give up his life when he had first targeted the exam participants. However, he had not intended to cause trouble for Olympus as he was doing now. I will now strip you of your position as examiner. I will also have all the authority of the 11th floor given to Olympus revoked. Administrator, how dare you raise your voice? Crack. Hypnos's body, which had raised its head, was crushed down. Hypnos, who had been trying to get up on his knees, had his face completely pressed to the floor. Grr, not only your position as examiner. You will be punished for thousands of years for the crime of touching an exam participant as an examiner. You will neither live nor die. An examiner is an important position. They are responsible for managing each floor's exam and finding out any foul play. As such, examiners can exercise enormous influence and authority within the tower, and have the responsibility that comes with it. I'll deal with you later, Hypnos. Gulp, rumble. Hypnos's body was sucked into the ground. Hypnos disappeared from his seat, glaring at Yu-1 with wide eyes. Soon, the administrator's gaze also moved to Yu-1. It's you again. The administrator knew Yu-1. Of course, the administrator was an existence that was usually difficult to meet even once. However, Yu-1 had already met the third administrator, from the tutorial to the first floor to the 11th floor. Furthermore, it was never an ordinary incident each time. Your name was Kim Yu-1. You're definitely not an average guy. Thanks to that, I have a lot of tiring work to do. Yu-1 said so and looked at the spot where Hypnos had disappeared. The administrator noticed the meaning of his words and curled his lips. You're definitely not an average guy. Yu-1 nodded. The administrator was definitely a fearsome opponent. He possessed a power comparable to the highest-ranking high rankers, and could exercise the authority of a ruler who ruled over each floor of the tower. Furthermore, unlike the rankers who were scattered among the various guilds, the administrator's strength was united as one. In other words, they were the rulers of this tower. However, that doesn't mean I need to be afraid. The administrator was different from Olympus. They had no purpose beyond their personal feelings or cause. As long as he didn't do anything outside the law, the administrator wasn't that fearsome of an existence. In any case, this test had a lot of strange corners. And I understand that the test supervisor is a proxy for the administrator. Are you blaming me? Someone has to. The administrator stared intently at Yu-1. Yu-1 did not avoid his gaze. Since things had come to this, the administrator would not lay a hand on him. After all, Yu-1 was the victim in all of this. It's not wrong. The administrator made an interesting expression. Certainly, this incident was not something that Yu-1, a test participant, should have to endure. The fact that the difficulty of the test had increased sharply due to the test supervisor's corruption. Very well, once the test is over, I promise you a sure reward. You won't go back on your word. I'm the administrator. I can't be treated like that guy. Certainly, the administrator's promise was believable. The administrator was like a living system. He would never lie. Good. Then, having received the confirmation he wanted, Yu-1 turned his gaze. There were several players watching them. Namgong-hoon, Namgong Sega's successor, and a player who was considered a candidate to become the next high ranker. With the enormous background of Namgong Sega, he could exert more influence than most rankers. There are many eyes watching. The administrator pretended not to know. There will be waves. Waves. Ha ha ha. The administrator began to move, carrying his luggage. Soon, a space opened up before his eyes. Namgong-hoon and his party, who had been watching the administrator disappear in an instant, flinched. Waves. Yu-1 and Namgong-hoon's eyes met. Well, what to do? Namgong-hoon, who had followed the king, whose identity was unknown, had been thinking. A ranker who was a test supervisor was after a player who was a test participant. That was literally the worst crime, breaking the laws and rules of the tower. It's true. Namgong-hoon's face became serious after hearing the details. Olympus, isn't this a big deal? Is it just a test supervisor's lapse? Are you crazy? A test supervisor attacking a participant? It's 100% related to the higher-ups. Ah, I'm going crazy. Should we just keep quiet? Would Hoon do that? The last remark was very conscious of Namgong-hoon. And it was something everyone agreed with. There was nothing they could do since they had already seen it. Olympus had committed a serious crime that should never have been committed. If this incident were made public, Olympus would suffer a major blow. But, is this real? So the opponent was a ranker. That's to the extent of being a test supervisor for a floor. Namgong-hoon's teammates looked at Yu-1. A fight with a ranker. It was a dream for players in the lower floors. That's because their ultimate goal in climbing the tower was to become a ranker. Especially for pure blood players. For players like Namgong-hoon, it had even greater significance. The next great sage heaven's equal. It wasn't the first time a ranker had been defeated by a player. Great sage heaven's equal Son Goku. He was also a top-ranked high ranker, and he had a record of defeating a ranker when he was a player a long time ago. At that time, Son Goku's reputation had reached its peak when the incident became known. Besides, the test supervisor on this floor is a ranker from Olympus. Perhaps if this incident were made known, it would have a much greater impact than the incident with Great Sage Heaven's equal. What do we do? In any case, they were witnesses to the incident. There were two options: keep quiet, or make this fact known outside. There was no reason to choose the latter. No matter how much background Namgong-hoon had from Namgong Sega, Olympus was a formidable opponent. If the relationship between Olympus and Namgang Sega were to go wrong, the world of the 10th floor, Murim, would be in great chaos. Even if it's not us, Olympus will be sanctioned. The actions of the test supervisor on the Olympus side affected the entire Olympus. On the 11th floor, Olympus' position would completely disappear, and the administrators of the other floors would also be wary of Olympus. It was obvious that an emergency would be declared for Olympus at this very moment. After contemplating for a long time, Namgang Hoon asked Wu Jin, "What do you plan to do?" Wu Jin had already crossed the river of no return with Olympus. He didn't know why Olympus was after him, but it was clear that Olympus would become Wu Jin's enemy after this incident. And it was impossible for a single individual to fight against Olympus. However, I'll fight. Wu Jin's answer was beyond Namgang Hoon's common sense. Until I bring Zeus down. Zeus, one of the rulers of the tower and the king of the great Olympus. Namgang Hoon's heart sank for a moment when Zeus's name was mentioned. Wu Jin called the giant's name so easily. How did you end up getting on Olympus' bad side? Did you have any bad blood with Olympus? I helped a blacksmith who was making unwanted weapons. It was the story of Hephaestus. Then they came after me to kill me. A blacksmith. Namgang Hoon was a direct descendant of the Namgang Sega family. He had seen and heard many things in the tower. Although it was a short story, Namgang Hoon could roughly guess what had happened. I see. Namgang Hoon nodded and turned around. Hey, Hoon, where are you going? His teammates followed him. Namgang Hoon took out his player kit and replied. The Murim competition is coming up soon. He typed a message. The recipient was his father. I'm going back to the Namgang Sega. The head of the Namgang Sega family and the ruler of the Murim guild. It was Namgang Jin Woon. After that, the 11th floor test proceeded under the supervision of the administrator. It was nothing to worry about. Most of the players on Team B had given up on the test. Wu Jin took the flags from the players on Team B and searched for the flags scattered throughout the forest. Time passed like that. The 24-hour time limit was almost up. I thought I was going to die for real. Hari Man collapsed on the ground, his legs giving out when he saw Wu Jin's face. There was blood splattered around him. The blood did not belong to Hari Man. The players from Team B who had tried to kill him to win the test. They had bled to death and failed to achieve their goal. You didn't die. It was a simple answer. Hari Man, who had felt like every second was hell, shook his head. He had thought more than once that he should have just given up on the test if he had known it would be like this. But you held on well without giving up. Hari Man raised his head at Wu Jin's words. Red flags. These were the flags that Wu Jin had collected so far. 618, the number written on the flag. He had collected over 600 flags by himself, when collecting even 5 to 10 would have been considered a lot. Ha ha. Hari Man laughed at the thought. The test was almost over. If he could receive this many flags, he would be able to gain a huge amount of achievement points. The rewards would be just as great. However, Hari Man's laughter was not out of joy like that. I did it, the compliment he had received from Wu Jin. And the joy of not giving up and persevering. I did it. Hari Man's hand trembled as he reached out for the flag. Yes, he had done it. He had fulfilled the role of the king, who had to survive and not give up. Of course, more than 90% of that role was thanks to Wu Jin. But he himself, he was the king of Team A, who had overcome the 11th floor test with Wu Jin. 618 flags have been acquired. 6180 achievement points have been acquired. As the flag was handed over, the same message appeared in Wu Jin and Hari Man's minds. And shortly after that, the test has ended. Team A, 623. Team B, 2, the winner is Team A. The achievement point shop is now available. 12th floor authority granted. You can move to the next floor. The 11th floor ranking has been updated. First place, 22,360 achievement points. The message appeared to the players who had participated in the 11th floor test. The conclusion had been reached. Chapter 77. First, Kim Yu-won, 2236 OP. Second, Zeus, 886 OP. Third, Hercules, 854 OP. Fourth, Odin, 802 OP. Opening square bracket. Closing square bracket. 36th, Halaman, 623 OP. A new record had been set on the 11th floor once again. A player appeared who broke the record set by the high ranker and the king of Olympus, Zeus. That guy is 36th. Halaman, who passed the test with Yuan, also recorded a fairly high ranking. In addition to the 5 flags he had before, He also received a flag from U1 and obtained a merit of over 6,000 points. This alone was a great record. 36th place was a record that surpassed even most high rankers. And Hargan is. U1 checked the new record for the 11th floor. There were many familiar names. Sun Ogong's ranking was 11th. Compared to his skill, it was a low ranking. He wasn't suited for team-based tests like this. Odin was 4th, and Hercules was 3rd. And then, another familiar name caught his eye. 6th. Hargan, 786 OP. The gap between 4th and 6th place wasn't that big. If he had collected just a few more flags, he would have been able to aim for 4th place. He's amazing. Hargan's ranking often appeared. He was steadily raising his rank as he climbed the tower. And on the 11th floor, he finally achieved a score comparable to the great beings of the tower. He's definitely changed. Hargan's talent had always been evident. What changed was the tutorial. And his encounter with U1. It was impossible to know what kind of stimulation that had on Hargan. It was true that the tiger gained wings as a reward for the tutorial. And with those wings, Hargan was climbing the tower with even better results. I wonder, after checking the rankings, U1 checked his merit points again. A merit of over 20,000 points. Even U1 hadn't expected this much. He had been somewhat satisfied when he passed 10,000 points, but it had more than doubled. There was one reason. Additional merit is being calculated for an unknown reason. 10,000 merit points have been acquired. A message that only appeared to U1. Perhaps it was a special reward given to U1 for defeating Hypnos. The administrator had kept his promise. Even with just the 10,000 merit points, it was enough to change the rankings all at once. It wasn't as much as he had hoped, but he wasn't dissatisfied with this much. After arriving on the 12th floor, U1 immediately secured lodging. For quite an expensive price. Only one left. You know you're lucky. 20 points for one night. And it was a small room of about 5 pyong. The world on the 12th floor was only one small city. Such a small land. Because of that, lodging was expensive, and it was difficult to get food. The 12th floor was the worst land for players to stay. There's nothing to do here. There were no dungeons, and there weren't many facilities. U1 unpacked his things in the small lodging. And then, errand boy, yes, did you call? A small fairy appeared as if it had been waiting. Its eyes sparkled, as if it was expecting something. Of course, considering the points and merit U1 currently had, it was natural for the errand boys to have their eyes on him. Perhaps if he hadn't called, it would have come to him first. I want to use the shop. Which shop would that be? Points, or merit points? The merit point shop. I can only use it here anyway, right? The merit points obtained on the 11th floor were like a type of point. The test on the 11th floor didn't give points separately, but it gave merit points, which were more valuable than points. The merit points obtained that way were used to use the merit point shop on the 12th floor. Yes, the merit point shop. I'll show you right away. Tring. A shop unfolded before his eyes. The reward for the 11th floor had the merit of being able to choose a reward with merit points. It was a unique method different from the rewards on other floors. There were various types. Even Yuan was surprised. They had this here, too. Among the items and skills that cost more than 10,000 points, there were some that even Yuan was curious about. The contribution points shop was different from the normal points shop. While the normal shop showed all the items and skills, the contribution points shop didn't show the ones that players couldn't buy. Until now, no player had ever acquired more than 10,000 contribution points, so it was obvious that the items in the contribution points shop weren't known to exist. What the heck is this? As the contribution points increased, the rate of increase also increased. When it passed 10,000 points and reached 20,000 points, skills that made Yuan's eyes widen appeared. It was a happy dilemma. No matter which one he chose, he would regret not choosing the other. But he had to make a decision. And among them, where did this go? One of the items that Yuan had been looking for. It was here. The choice wasn't difficult. There were other skills and items that he was curious about, but there were many ways to replace them. But this one there was no way to replace it. I'll take this. 22,000 contribution points have been used. The Namgung family, the largest group in the Murim, excluding the heavenly demonic cult, and the center of the world that led the Murim guild. In addition, a prestigious family that had produced numerous rankers and high rankers. You're here. Namgung Hoon arrived at the Namgung family. Thud, thud, Namgung Hoon stood before his father, Namgung Jinwoon. A beard that had grown over a foot long, thick eyebrows. A body that had not aged despite his age. Namgung-hoon's father, and the one who had raised the Namgung family, which had been on the verge of extinction long ago, to the top of the Murim. He was Namgung Jinwoon. You came early. Namgung Jinwoon was sitting in front of a pile of documents. It was a sight that didn't suit him, who had wielded a sword all his life. But as time passed, there were more days when he had to look at papers. It was because the power and influence of the Namgung family had accumulated to that extent. Isn't there still a lot of time left until the Murim competition? I have something to tell you. If that's the case, you could have contacted me through the kit. I judged that it would not be good for a record to remain. The player kit wasn't universal. There were sometimes players and rankers who hacked into the player kit to check the records. The security of this matter was that important. Namgung Jinwoon took his eyes off the documents and looked at Namgung-hoon. Tell me, Olympus is moving. They're always moving. It seems they have found Hephaestus. Namgung Jinwoon's hand, which was reaching for a cold teacup, stopped. As if telling him to continue, he looked at Namgung-hoon. They are preparing for the Gigantomachia. Gigantomachia. Knock. Instead of drinking tea, he tapped the teacup with his finger. Unpleasant memories came to mind. A tragedy that all the old rankers remembered. The only ones who considered that tragedy a memory were Olympus on this tower. Where did you get that information? I heard it from Kim Yuan. Kim Yuan. I've heard the name. Yuan's name was quite famous in the Murim. Rankers were gradually recognizing Yuan's name, but the fact that he had passed the Heavenly Demonic Cults test was a big event in the Murim. Moreover, Namgung Jinwoon, who knew about the Heavenly Demonic Cult and the Heavenly Demon, couldn't help but pay attention to the rumors. But, even so, isn't he still just a player? How does he know such information? No matter what, he was still too small compared to Olympus. A mere player. That stereotype couldn't be easily broken unless he saw it for himself. Olympus was targeting Kim Yuan. Targeting. Actually. Namgung-hoon told him what happened during the test on the 11th floor. Namgung Jinwoon's expression gradually distorted. It was a hard story to believe, but it was his son's words, so he couldn't not believe it. He has already been fighting Olympus for a long time. Namgung Jinwoon groaned slightly. A mere player who hadn't even become a ranker was fighting alone against the giant Olympus. Even if he hadn't known the truth, Namgung Jinwoon felt a prickling sensation in his chest. Who else knows about this? All of my teammates know. Your team has Gibbons. Yes, it's only a matter of time before Asgard finds out. Gibbons was a player sponsored by Asgard. Namgung Jinwoon felt a huge wave of change beginning. Olympus had begun to move. The second Gigantomachie. And caught in the middle of it was a small star that had just begun to shine. Namgung Jinwoon got up from his seat and looked out the window of the head of the family's quarters. The movements of the clans preparing for the Murim competition seemed busier than ever. It seemed that this Murim competition would be a bit noisy. Bang! Splash! The flames that flew in a straight line shattered the target. Sparks flew, and cheers erupted from all sides. Wow! Did he just hit that? I couldn't even see it well. Before they knew it, the testing ground was filled with spectators. A test where you had to hit and knock down a total of 100 targets. The test lasted for a total of 1 hour, and the targets got faster and faster as the number increased. Yuan gathered the sacred fire in his hand again. A round target appeared again. The speed was faster than before. It's not bad for practice. Yuan knew how to handle various weapons. Among them, the weapon he was most proficient with was the sword, but he was just as good with the spear. And spear fighting was one of Yuan's specialties. Whoosh! A spear made of flames. His concentration was still weak, so it wasn't very sharp, but it was quite powerful nonetheless. Yuan's eyes could see the direction the target was flying. The next moment, thwack! The flames that left Yuan's hand pierced the last target. Boom! 1,000 targets have been destroyed. You have passed the 19th floor test. You can move to the next floor. Level up. Strength increased by 1. Health increased by 1. Sense increased by 1. 50,000 points have been acquired. Messages popped up before Yuan, who was looking at the broken targets scattered at his feet. 10 times the passing criteria. Besides, there were still about 5 minutes left. It seemed that there were no more targets left after this. Tisk. Even though it should have been a pleasant alarm, Yuan frowned. It was because there was no other reward besides the increase in stats and points from leveling up. Besides, the stats that increased were mostly other stats, not his magic power, which was almost at 100. It's reaching its limit. It had already become difficult to get stronger with just simple hunting and test rewards. It was an ambiguous situation where he should be happy that he was growing faster than expected, or regretful that his growth was being blocked. I'll have to aim for the 20th floor and above to get a proper reward. The 10 floor tests were difficult, but the rewards were just as great. Just look at how he had obtained the sacred fire from the Cheonma Shinkyo on the 10th floor. Besides, unlike the Murim world on the 10th floor, he also knew what was hidden on the 20th floor. I guess I have to stop for a bit. He had earned the qualification to reside on the 20th floor. The test on the 20th floor was quite tricky. No, to be exact, what Yuan had to do in it was tricky. Magic power. 99. One stat left. He knew of one way to fill this. Daewondan, the best elixir in Murim, which was made once every 3 years and was worth millions of points. I guess I should head down. Yuan didn't head up. The direction was down. The Murim competition was just a day away. Chapter 78. Martial World Competition. The grandest event in the martial world and a huge event representing the martial world of the 10th floor. It was also a festival that garnered the attention of numerous rankers. As the martial world competition drew near, the martial world city was packed with people. Wow, there are really a lot of people. An inn, did you find one? There are no vacancies, so we'll have to merge our inns. What should we do then? I don't know. That's why I told you to come here early and reserve a spot. How could you come here 5 days in advance? It's not just for watching the tournament, there are a lot of things to see. You really don't know anything. I'm selling hot and delicious jeonbyeong. I also have stir-fried vegetables and dumplings. On the street, simple food was being sold, and attractions were being sold for money. People ate and drank while looking at the list of participants in the martial world competition and discussing it. Isn't it Namgong-hoon? The Namgong Sega is the organizer of the martial world competition, and he's a genius. So what if it's the Namgong Sega? He hasn't even entered a large guild yet. Then is it Hargan? Hargan is participating in the tournament. Yeah, that guy is the best among the high-ranking purebloods in the past few hundred years. He climbed to the 25th floor early and has been waiting for the tournament. His speed is terrifying. At this rate, it wouldn't be difficult for him to become a ranker within 10 years. Hargan was one of the strong candidates to win the martial world competition. Not only was he right on the 25th floor, the participation limit for the martial world competition, but his performance on each floor was also in the top ranks. Hey, big news. What's the matter? Why are you so late? Sit down first. Auntie, add another bottle of liquor. A little more side dish. No, that's not important right now. The group that joined late said, breathing heavily. Kim Yu-won is participating. What, really? I thought he would have already started conquering the next floor by now. I didn't know he would be interested in something like this. There were several reasons why players participated in the martial world competition. The first was to show off their skills and receive the sponsorship of a higher-ranked guild. The martial world competition was a place where numerous guilds focused their attention. If one were to achieve high results in such a place, it wouldn't be difficult to receive the sponsorship of a guild. The second was to raise the name of the guild. Players in the lower floors were like the future of the guild. Players would climb the tower, become rankers, and become the future strength of the guild. And depending on the number of guild-affiliated players who performed well in the martial world competition, the guild's reputation would also change. This was the reason why many guilds pushed their affiliated players into the martial world competition. The more guild-affiliated players that ranked in the top ranks, the more the guild's reputation would rise and they would be able to expand their influence. He's not trying to get the guild's attention. Is it because of the prize? Of course he's participating because he thinks he'll win. The gazes of the group eating changed. These rankers hadn't come down to the 10th floor just for fun. When was the last time you contacted Kim Yu-won? The man in the center of the group spoke. He was someone who didn't speak about trivial gossip. When he spoke, the atmosphere around him changed. It was right after he passed the 8th floor. It's been a while. He climbed to the 20th floor in the meantime, so it's been a while, but it hasn't been that long. Anyway, I sent a message and a person with him, but he didn't even pay attention. I'll go myself this time. A man with blue scales covering his face. Branel, a dragon-born ranker, got up from his seat. In the name of our guild, 12 zodiacs. Go back. That was all he said. Branel, who had finally found his accommodation after much searching, looked dazed for a moment at the snub. Go back. He had thought that he would at least be served a cup of tea, have a short conversation, and be rejected. He also had the ambition to find out why everyone was so obsessed with Kim Yu-won. But what does this mean? That's rude. At Branel's words, Wu Wen shook his head. Branel's expression hardened as he turned his head. He had seen a familiar face. Are you from the 12 gods? I heard things weren't going well these days, but the guild master is moving in person and doing his utmost. Suriel, a ranker from the giant guild, heaven. The archangel Suriel, who stood before the high ranker, was there. Gulp, a ranker from heaven, a ranker who held the rank of archangel had moved in person. Usually, they would send a player from a lower floor to make a recruitment offer. Surely it's not just me. A ranker had moved in person to make a recruitment offer. Such a case was never common. That's why he intended to move first and quickly lure Wu Wen away. No matter how outstanding, a mere player wouldn't be able to overcome the pressure of a ranker. However, Branel's thoughts were wrong from the beginning. This was not the first time a ranker had visited in person. Quite a long time ago. Even before going up to the 10th floor, Wu Wen had met several rankers. It's nice to see you. As the leader of the pack, work hard in the future. Branel bit his lip at Suriel's encouragement. Even though he was a ranker from the Dragon clan, his opponent was an archangel from heaven. He couldn't help but feel infinitely small. Are you going to tell me to go back? Suriel looked alternately at Branel and Wu Wen before asking. It seemed that there was no need for a long conversation. Wu Wen seemed familiar with this situation. It's already the 19th time today. I see. A car that had already been visited by several guilds. Wu Wen had not talked to either of them. There had been no cases where a high-ranking ranker like Suriel had come in person, but no matter who came, the answer would be the same. But if you ever change your mind, please contact us. Heaven will always leave a place for you. That won't happen. It was an answer that left no room for doubt. Unlike Suriel, who turned around and left, Branel, who still had some regrets, remained in place. And then, a new guest arrived. How about me? Should I go back? Wu Wen, who was about to go back into the room, stopped in his tracks. For a moment, he thought it was annoying, but when he saw the guest's face, he felt a little happy. Long time no see, friend. Ha, Hargan, blonde hair and ripped eyes. A handsome man with a hearty appearance. It was exactly the face of Hargan, as he had heard in the rumors. Branel remembered that Hargan and Wu Wen had been in the tutorial together. Wu Wen stared at him and replied. Yeah, go back. Huh, what, really? I'm kidding. You come in. Wu Wen goes in without closing the door. Hargan looked at Wu Wen's back and laughed in vain. Wow, what a really boring guy. Hargan grumbled like that and followed Wu Wen in. Thump, the door closed. Branel stood there blankly and muttered. Let's go, just. The accommodation Wu Wen was staying in was quite spacious. A space of about 20 pyong. To this extent, it was one of the best accommodations that could be found nearby. How did you get this place? I paid a lot of money. You have a lot of money. Points keep piling up. I finally stopped climbing the tower and came down, so I should rest comfortably. Really? Wu Wen brought water to Hargan. Cold water that was perfect for the hot weather. It was about time Hargan took the cup. Thump, thump, is Mr. Kim Yu-won here? Who's here? Don't worry about it. If it's urgent, they'll break in and come in. It's cool to think about it once. Do you have a lot of these things? I used to come often, but it's especially bad here. It must be because of the Muram competition. At this time, guilds that are determined to recruit players gather in Muram. Wu Wen nodded. It was annoying, but it was only a few days. Probably once he got out of the 10th floor, it would be quiet again. How did you find this place? You must usually be a famous person. I found out when I searched a little. If you had asked, I would have just told you. It wouldn't have been fun if I had just told you. It would have been more surprising if I had made a sudden appearance, right? I'm not really surprised. I thought he would have changed a lot, but Hargan was still the same. A sly personality, serious eyes, and confident speech. He was one of the few, real, people that Yuan acknowledged. What about the other team members? They're staying at the inn. They snuck out separately when they heard I was meeting you. Did anyone die? One person. That's good. We're all going to be rankers. We all have the potential for it. It was a statement full of confidence. And in reality, his words were true. Already, some of his team members had become rankers in the future that Yuan knew. Lee Sung-woon, I'm not sure about him. If there was a variable, it was Lee Sung-woon. He was a player from Earth, just like Yuan. He was talented in mana, enough to use mana stones early on, so it was hard to guess how much he had grown by now. I'll know once I see him. There was no known information about Lee Sung-woon. Originally, he was a player who should have died in the tutorial. Was it because they were from the same hometown? Out of Hargan's team members, he was the most memorable. You really caused a huge commotion this time. Yuan had a puzzled expression. He wasn't pretending not to know. There were more than one or two things that came to mind. Hephaestus, did you save him? How did you know about that? Even if you're considered as leftovers, you're still my father. Do you think you're the only one who became a ranker in a situation like mine? Yuan nodded at Hargan's words. There were definitely many who were of Zeus's bloodline but not his legitimate children. For example, Apollo and Artemis, the high rankers of Olympus, were also of Zeus's bloodline but were illegitimate children. I get all sorts of information. I thought you were crazy when I heard it. Hargan clicked his tongue. Why did you do that? Even if you survived a fight with a ranker, you went against Olympus. The person who knows that came all the way here. I don't really pay attention to my surroundings. And right now, the one who's glaring at you is Hera's side. Hera and Ares didn't get along with Hargan in the first place. He probably didn't think he needed to watch out for them. What about Zeus? You're the first person to call my father's name so casually. Anyways, my father hasn't been involved in Olympus for a while now. He's been focused on conquering the next floor. The tower, which was known to have a total of 100 floors, was actually not the end. People called players who reached the 100th floor rankers, but that was only because the 100th floor's test hadn't been cleared yet. There were higher floors in the tower, and people called the floors above the 100th floor the ceiling. Anyways, Olympus is after you because you saved the criminal Hephaestus, so hide for a while. I'll talk to my father when I get the chance. It seemed like Hargan didn't know what happened on the 11th floor. Of course, the fact that the test supervisor had attacked a test participant had to be kept a secret. Even Hargan wouldn't have been able to find out about it. Hargan's words were definitely filled with good intentions. However, instead of being thankful for his words, Yuan clicked his tongue. I guess you knew about it too. What do you mean, too? I mean that old man. They say he's a criminal in Olympus. Yuan finished his drink and got up. Are you coming with me? Where? To the first floor. He had business there anyway, so he was going to stop by for a bit before the martial arts competition started. To see Mr. Hephaestus. At those words, Hargan's expression changed subtly. Chapter 79. Clang, clang, the noisy sound of hammering. The hand that was repeatedly pounding the heavy hammer headed towards one side. The hand grabbed another small hammer. Clang, the repeated work with the smaller hammer. Finally, Hephaestus stopped hammering and put the lump of iron that had yet to take shape back into the fire, and only then did he stop working. Phew, the towel that he had left hanging on one side of the workshop had become completely dry and hot. Hephaestus wiped the sweat from his forehead with the towel. It was hot and stuffy. It had already been 3 days since he had stopped moving in the workshop. Did I overdo it? The work that he had been commissioned to do had piled up. The items he had been commissioned to make were all defensive gear. Armor, shields, or accessories with special skills. They were all items that lacked killing power. My hands are tingling. Hephaestus thought of the vast amount of minerals that were piling up in his inventory. Just the items that came to mind right away were a mountain. And half of them were melee weapons. However, Hephaestus did not make weapons like swords and spears. He had made exactly one. Just one sword for his benefactor to use. Creak, the sound of footsteps descending into the workshop. Hephaestus, who had been wiping away his sweat and resting for a moment, got up from his seat. You're here. There was only one person who would come into his workshop without knocking. Especially since he had recently sent a message through the player kit saying that he would be visiting soon. It was finished, but Hephaestus looked at the gauntlet that was slowly cooling in the water. Whether that guy can handle this, that's the problem. It was Yuan, who had fought a ranker from the first floor. His skills were definitely not in doubt. By now, he might have reached a strength that truly rivaled rankers. However, even so, it was the same. It wasn't a matter of strength or weakness. It was a matter of qualification. Are you there? Is that what someone who just opened the door and came in should say? Hephaestus sank his happy heart and responded curtly when he saw Yuan's face. Soon, Yuan came down the stairs. Hephaestus, who was carrying the luggage, could see the faces of the two people. Who's that guy in the back? Ah, this is. Yuan paused for a moment when he saw Hephaestus' hardened expression. His gaze was directed at Hargan's blonde hair. Blonde hair was not a particularly unusual hair color, but a radiant blonde like Hargan's was not very common. However, he could not leave the question unanswered. Just as Yuan was about to answer. My name is Hargan. Hargan introduced himself first. An unpleasant expression. Hephaestus seemed to know Hargan. You're your father's son. If it's all the same, why don't you call me your brother? Our sibling rivalry was too fierce to call each other such friendly names. Hephaestus' gaze turned to the hammer. Did you come to catch me too? No, I didn't. Of course not. I don't have the ability to do that. Hargan hurriedly waved his hands. Even though his profession was a blacksmith, his opponent was a ranker. Not just any ranker, but a ranker who had climbed the tower thousands of years ago. No matter how famous Hargan was as a player in the lower floors, he was no match for him. Then why did you come? I just wanted to see you. Me, why? Because I can't trust Olympus. Hephaestus' eyes widened at Hargan's answer. He couldn't trust Olympus. Those words came from the mouth of Hargan, the direct descendant of Zeus. You know, brother, I learned that you were a criminal. Ever since I was born. But this friend saved you. Yuan made Hargan's eyes widen. The Olympus I believed was everything in the world turned out to be incomplete. So from then on, I made up my mind. I would believe what I saw rather than what I heard. I wanted to see for myself and judge. What kind of person is Mr. Hephaestus, who I had only heard of in words? Hephaestus, who had a sharp expression, stroked his chin and looked at Hargan. Gorgeous and beautiful blonde hair. Confident eyes and golden eyes like hair. They look alike. Hephaestus saw the face of the Olympus king he respected the most in Hargan's face. Rumors were rife. Even Hephaestus, who was not interested in the affairs of the world, had heard the name a couple of times. Hargan was more famous than most rankers. Hargan, he inherited the most blood of Zeus. So, how do you see it? What can I tell just by looking at your face? Hargan's eyes scanned the interior of the workshop. All he could see were items such as armor, shields, and helmets. In a short time, Hargan felt a lot from looking at the workshop. You don't make weapons. ... It wasn't like that from the beginning, was it? How many weapons have you made for Olympus, brother? It wasn't from the beginning. Hephaestus looked at the sword that Yuan had on his waist. The most recent sword he had made. I can't tell you how excited I was when I made that. When did you stop making weapons? Hephaestus closed his eyes at Hargan's question. The silence felt quite long because the conversation had been cut off, albeit briefly. Hargan did not press for an answer even in silence. Various emotions appeared and disappeared on his face. Hephaestus, who had barely erased the look of anguish, finally answered. Since the gigantomachy. Yuan waited outside for the conversation between Hargan and Hephaestus to end. The conversation between the two was long. Gigantomachy. Hargan's heart had been pounding since that name came up. The weapons I made pierced the hearts of the giants. Giants, one of the races that ruled the tower. Their innate strength and the power emanating from their stature made them the dominant species of the tower. They considered Olympus as their ally. Hephaestus, who said so, shook his head. No, maybe they were friends. No, I should say both. Anyway, Hephaestus, who muttered, looked into Hargan's eyes again. People outside might point fingers at them and call them ugly, but we shouldn't do that. Olympus was able to exist because of the giants. Did something like that happen? You youngins don't know much about it. Maybe the old rankers would know, but you guys probably only grew up hearing the stories. Hephaestus suddenly started talking about my time. Rankers who had lived for thousands of years knew a lot. But around the time the giants began to be ostracized, Olympus declared war on them. Hargan's brow furrowed. Why? For political reasons. The outside world didn't look favorably on them. And if we could just deal with the giants, we could take away the authority of the floor we shared with them. Really, was it just for something like that? Fortunately. Yes, it seems like it's just that, to you. In fact, there are many who don't think so. Hephaestus muttered sarcastically, including our father. The war with the giants that started like that was the gigantomachy. The giants of Asgard and the giants of Olympus, and the rankers of each guild who joined in for their own interests. The war grew, and the weapons I made took the lives of my friends. Yuan, who had been listening to the story, bowed his head. It was the second time he had heard this story. I had heard this story a second time before returning to the past. At that time, Hephaestus was closer than he is now, and he showed a weak appearance in front of Yuan. Hephaestus, who was recalling the past, sobbed loudly. Perhaps his feelings are the same now as they were then. He just gritted his teeth and suppressed his emotions to save face. They were sacrificed. To raise Olympus' position, and to wash away the disgrace of Olympus joining hands with the gigantes. So since then, I stopped working for Olympus. I haven't made weapons since then. Thud. Instead of crying, Hephaestus gritted his teeth and showed his anger. But a few decades ago, they suddenly asked me to make weapons again. The quick-witted Hargan understood what he meant. Surely, again, because the gigantes are still there. Is it happening again? Gigantomachia. It's still in preparation, but most likely. It couldn't be denied. Hephaestus was the best blacksmith and the strongest in the tower. The items he made had a tremendous impact, especially in large-scale wars. It wasn't for nothing that one of the reasons why Olympus was able to exist was because of Hephaestus. If the reason they were after Hephaestus was because of the next Gigantomachia, it was a plausible story. It's up to you who to believe. I could be wrong. Hephaestus got up from his seat. There was nothing more to say. I'm going to fight against Olympus. With those words, Hephaestus looked at Yuan. It was time. Yuan, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, got up from his seat. You didn't come here just to introduce him, did you? Yes, the items are in the warehouse over there. The direction Hephaestus pointed to was the underground warehouse connected to the lower part of the workshop. Follow me. Hargan stayed in the workshop instead of following. He seemed to have a lot on his mind. He always seemed to act cool and collected, but Hargan was quite a thoughtful person. He needs time to sort things out. I knew that Hargan didn't trust Olympus absolutely. Just looking at the current situation on the first floor, Olympus couldn't be seen as justice. But Gigantomachia was a whole other matter. If I accept what that man said, Olympus will no longer be justice to that guy. It was like the pillar of Olympus that Hargan had believed in all his life was shaking. It will probably take him a while to make a judgment. He seems like a good guy. Hephaestus, who was walking a few steps ahead, gave an unusually stingy compliment. I can see why you brought him. Is that so? Are you going to keep him with you? It seemed like Hephaestus thought of Hargan as part of Yuan's team. Yuan didn't answer right away. He was still thinking. Don't just think about it. Aren't you doing the same thing? What am I doing? You still don't trust that guy, do you? It's still a time of uncertainty. I can't just watch a guy who I don't know where he'll swing. Is it because of his age? That's not all. If it was, I wouldn't be able to trust you either. Click, creak, creak. The iron chains locked in several layers were released, and the heavy iron door opened. I made it, but it turned out to be a bit of a pain in the ass. Sealed chains. The black mana that began to flow out as the door opened gave Yuan goosebumps. I named it first. It seemed that Yuan's naming of the sword the other day didn't sit well with him. Opening the door wide, Hephaestus introduced another one of his masterpieces. This is Kaini. Chapter 80. Wu Wan stared at the black gauntlets hanging in the middle of the room, filled with Hephaestus' proud introduction. The shape of the gauntlet was simple. Ordinary black gauntlets. They looked more like sleek cotton gloves than iron gauntlets. Is this the Quina? Wu Wan couldn't help but be a little surprised after receiving the introduction. He knew that Hephaestus was the one who named Quina. But he didn't expect the same name to appear even though it was a different type of item. That's amazing. Wu Wan approached the Quina, which had a different shape than he knew. The gauntlet-shaped Quina was floating in the air. Black mana was flowing out of the Quina as usual. I made it into a gauntlet shape as requested. I put the jewels on the outside so that they wouldn't be visible from the outside. Wu Wan examined the shape of the Quina. It was certainly just an ordinary gauntlet to the naked eye. And it was similar to the characteristics of the Quina that Wu Wan remembered. After all, the Quina used by Hades was just a black helmet without any patterns or characteristics. Can I try it on? That's why I made it, of course. Hephaestus looked quite pleased. It seemed that he wanted to introduce the item he had made as soon as possible. He had never looked so happy as he did at this moment. Rustle. The texture was strange. It looked like smooth cotton, but what he felt on his fingertips was closer to a mix of cotton and metal. It was a texture that even Wu Wan had never felt before. And that wasn't all that was strange. It's quite heavy. The weight of the Quina on his palm was not as light as it looked. Even iron gauntlets probably wouldn't be this heavy. It's incredibly thin. Yes, it's hard to believe that it's really made of adamantium. I used everything you brought. At Hephaestus' words, Wu Wan looked at the Quina with curious eyes. It was about 1 millimeter thick. It wasn't very big, so he thought that he wouldn't use all of the adamantium he had brought. But he used it all to make this. It made sense why it was so heavy despite its appearance. Did you reduce the volume? The weight was also quite light compared to the adamantium that Wu Wan had brought. The heaviness was only in comparison to what it looked like. Wu Wan put the quina on his hand, admiring Hephaestus' skills once again. Then, whoa, Wu Wan's vision changed in an instant. The already dark interior of Hephaestus' warehouse turned into complete darkness. It felt like he had entered the skill that Hypnos had used a while ago. No, it's even darker than that. Wu Wan didn't panic even with the sudden change of scenery. He didn't take off the quina either. This is a test of the quina. Clank. A space opened up before his eyes, and a huge yellow eye appeared. The eye was bigger than Wu Wan's height. It blinked a few times and looked at Wu Wan. Who are you? That was what he wanted to ask. A trembling and broken voice. He thought it was strange that a guy with only eyes could speak so well. Kim Wu Wan. At another time, in the strange. Wu Wan, who hadn't been shaken even when the giant eye appeared, was surprised. He couldn't understand it properly because it was cut off, but one word stuck in his mind. Another time. What is this guy doing? Not much was known about the 3 artifacts of Olympus, including the quina made from the black divine stone. It disappeared with the invasion of the outer. However, he had only heard a little bit of information through Cronus. Who are you? I am, eyes, mouth, no, speech. Your eyes, and you can't speak because you don't have a mouth. There was no answer. He was an annoying guy. It's going to be hard to have a proper conversation. He wondered if this guy was sealed in the black divine stone, if he was the subject that drew out the power of the black divine stone, or if he was the black divine stone itself. He wanted to know which one it was. And if possible, he wanted to be able to use the power of the quina for sure this time. As Wu Wan was about to give up on the conversation halfway. I know, Al, I'm not sure what the other words were, but I could clearly hear those words. The eyes spoke again. Al, who's Al, where? Another word that needed interpretation. But I could understand the meaning to some extent. Whose egg are you talking about? Where did it come from? Yu Wan thought of the egg in his inventory. The egg that had been dormant ever since he got his hands on the holy fire. It hadn't sent him any messages for quite some time. But then, buzz, inside the inventory. After a long time, he felt a small movement. The egg stirs. The egg cries out. For the first time in months, the egg started to move. Cheep, cheep, cheep. In response, energy rose through the yellow eyes. Ominous black mana. It was much denser than the mana of the black stone that Yu Wan handled. Dangerous. Yu Wan instinctively moved to avoid it. If he were to come into contact with mana of such concentration, his body would decay and crumble. I have to avoid it. Crack bang. The mana scattered in all directions. There was nowhere to run. It was already coming at Yu Wan. Too late. Whoosh. Yu Wan activated the holy fire with all his might. He didn't know how to deal with Kaini right now. If he couldn't avoid it, he had no choice but to resist. But, crunch, crackle, instead of attacking Yu Wan, the scattered dark mana entered the inventory at his waist. Yu Wan, who had raised the holy fire to resist, paused for a moment. It seemed that the mana emitted from the eyes wasn't trying to attack him. Then why the hell? The hatching rate of the egg has increased. Hatching rate, 14.12%. Hatching rate, 15.23%. Hatching rate, 17.97%. Hatching rate. Messages popped up one after another. Yu Wan's eyes widened. The egg's hatching rate had increased. The egg was gradually increasing its hatching rate by consuming the mana emitted from the eyes. It seemed that it had woken up from its sleep because a delicious energy had appeared when it was hungry. Hatching rate, 41.29%. The final hatching rate was 41%. It was quite high. Even the hatching rate that had increased after consuming the body of the Orochi was only 13%. Do you know what this is? Yu Wan suddenly asked the eyes that had increased the egg's hatching rate. The egg of unknown name that Yu Wan possessed came from the outer. He thought that if anyone knew where they came from, it might be this guy. Cheep, cheep. The color of the eyes gradually faded. The darkness that had surrounded the area also gradually disappeared. Yu Wan felt the eerie energy that had filled the surroundings disappear. Watch over, spring. The end of the sentence was blurry. The awkward speech was a little clearer. And as the darkness receded, sounds from outside could be heard. Clang. A dull hammering sound. The atmosphere around him shook as if it were being impacted. At the same time, a hammer fell over Yu Wan's head. Boom. Mister. Yu Wan realized whose hammer it was and hurriedly shouted. He was about to draw his sword. Oh, the hammer stopped in the middle. Soon, the darkness completely receded, and Hephaestus's face was revealed. He had a slightly bewildered expression. Are you okay? Huh. There were hammer marks all over the floor. It seemed that he had diligently swung the hammer, thinking that Yu-won was in trouble. Yu-won didn't answer his question right away. He had almost died. If he had been hit by Hephaestus's hammer, he might not have gotten off with just a minor injury. I somehow managed. Yu-won looked at the black gauntlet on his hand. It felt good to wear. It was smooth and soft. It felt like a part of his body, except for the weight. Kaini, one of the three gods of Olympus, an item that symbolized Hades. Watch over. The last words Kaini's eyes left before disappearing. At least he said the last word clearly. The only thing he could hear clearly was that last comment. Clank. Yu-won clenched his fist. Black divine stone. The item also known as the fragment of Quinn. He didn't know that this item held such a secret. There are 2 more fragments left. And with the addition of Quinn's fragment, Yu-won remembered that there were a total of 3 fragments. I should collect them and see what happens. His next target was the fragment of the trident. The workshop shook. Harkin, who had been lost in thought for a while, suddenly got up and ran towards the direction Yu-won and Hephaestus had left. What happened? Hephaestus and Yu-won were just coming out of the warehouse. Yu-won was wearing gloves that he hadn't seen before. It seemed like a newly acquired item. Well, his answer to the question was unclear. I'm not sure. Yes, why don't you ask this guy? He might know. Hephaestus answered before walking away. Judging from the hammer in his hand, it seemed like the noise from before was the sound of his hammering after all. What the hell are you talking about? Well, are you also going to give me that answer? I'm really telling you the truth. Yu-won also didn't know what the fragment of Quinn was. Hephaestus had only tried to save Yu-won because he sensed that it was too dangerous. You didn't fight. However, Harkin, who didn't know the inside story, couldn't help but think that Hephaestus and Yu-won had suddenly fought with their weapons drawn. No, then that's fine. Have you organized your thoughts? It's still a bit complicated. Harkin scratched his head. He didn't distrust what Hephaestus had said. In fact, there had been quite a few people who viewed gigantomachia negatively for a long time. I think I should meet my brother and sister first. Who are they? You don't have just 1 or 2 siblings. My brother Apollo and my sister Artemis. The 2 of them were Zeus's children born out of wedlock, just like Harkin. It seemed like they had become closer than their other siblings because they were in a similar situation. They might know something. Apollo and Artemis were among the top 10 high rankers in Olympus. Plus, they were main characters who had directly participated in gigantomachia, so they were bound to know a lot of information. It seemed like Harkin wanted to think about this a bit more carefully. I don't know. For now, we should focus on the martial arts competition. The rewards are good, and I need to make a name for myself anyway so that I can increase my influence in Olympus. You care about that more than I thought. I have too. I'm not like my brother Ares. I have to keep proving my worth to build up my forces. Harkin's voice was determined. Yu-won could see how he had lived and was living. There's no better stage for that than this martial arts competition. I heard that there are more rankers watching this martial arts competition than usual. The martial arts competition always garnered attention. But the level of attention varied each time. Depending on the level and reputation of the participating players, the reputation and number of rankers watching also changed. In that regard, this martial arts competition was the most highly anticipated stage of all time. There was one reason for that. It was because the level of the players was so high. Of course, more than half of that attention was focused on Yu-won. Harkin listed the names and guilds of the rankers who had visited the martial arts competition. I heard that there are a few other wandering rankers as well. Oh, right, and the second reason why this martial arts competition was so highly anticipated. I heard that the sub-leader of the Heavenly Demon cult is also participating this time. That was because a sleeping tiger had left its den.